doing doing these presidential debates again. Um, Back at it. We have two tonight. Just two. The first one's an hour. Second one's an hour and a half. This will definitely be our shortest chunk, even though I think at some point I might break up some of them. I think there's some that are like an hour and a half. There's like three of them later on. We did do the 5 hours on what was that, Sunday, but for me to fit some of them during the week, I might have to break up some of them, but we'll see. But if we can get these two done, that means we have nine. We have nine completed out of 35, which is, I think, a great start considering it's only the 6th day of June. So I want to keep up at getting through these just in time for August, when the Republican primaries will be heating up, I think. If anything, Mike Pence has announced he's running. And I think Governor Christie or whatever, no, he's not, former governor, Chris Christie there. Chris Christie is
thank you
running.
very much. This is incredible. Media will not show the magnitude of this crowd. Even when I turned on today, I looked, and I saw thousands of people
Thousands
here.
of people.
But you don't see hundreds of thousands of people behind you because they don't want to show that. We have hundreds of thousands of people here, and I just want them to be recognized by the fake news media. Turn your cameras, please, and show what's really happening out here, because these people are not going to take it any.
This is a Trump quote, isn't it? That's a Trump quote. Thanks, Ethan, for the 64 months. I can't do math of how long that is in terms of years. But that's his January 6th speech? Oh my God. Yeah, turn the cameras around. See how many people are there. There sure was people there. And they sure did things. But yeah, we're watching two debates today. And this one's interesting. This one's interesting because the first debate isn't Reagan versus Carter. Reagan and Carter only debated once, and it was in the second debate. This first debate, which is actually in Baltimore, took place in Baltimore at the Convention Center. September 21st, 1980, is between John Anderson, who is running as independent, versus Ronald Reagan. This is interesting because I feel like if someone... Well, there was Ross Perot as well, which we'll get to in the 90s. And they were kind of like the last like independent, not part of the Democrats or Republican Party running for president that also got a national stage. So I'm really interested to see what John Anderson, I don't know anything about him, so I'm curious to see what kind of independent he is. Usually I feel like independents are either you have someone like Bernie Sanders, or you have someone who just like, I hate both parties, but in like I'm still like, they'll claim to be a centrist, a morally correct, or like, I use logic to decide my politics, or I'm rational, that kind of stuff. So that's what I'm curious to see, if he's gonna be like that. But also my other thing going into these debates is how did Ronald Reagan, he would wind up winning, obviously, the 1980 election in a landslide. I think one of the biggest landslides, if not the biggest landslide in presidential history. How did this man do that? Was it part of the campaigning? I'm sure. But I also want to see, sorry, spoilers. But I also want to see, like, maybe the debates kind of, kind of brought the people maybe who don't normally vote Republican to the side. But yeah, we'll get into that. I don't want to look in too much into John Anderson because I'm just curious what he'll say, and I'll take it at face value. But we'll look into like why. If I remember correctly, I did read that Carter was invited to this first debate, but he declined it because either he didn't take Anderson seriously, or didn't want to do. He felt that was 3 people would be too much. I don't remember which one, but it's one of those reasons. Maybe it was a combination of both. But don't quote me on that. But yeah, we're going to get right into it. So in total, the stream will probably be 2.5 hours. Definitely one of our shorter ones. And I'm not going to stop it. Maybe here and there I will, but just like the last couple streams, I'm not going to stop it too much. And I forgot to say it last time, but and I did say it the first stream. Just remember that this is from the 80s, and that maybe some terminology wouldn't be politically correct now. So just keep that in mind, that obviously I don't condone some of the language that might have been used, but so far it's been pretty good. But like I said, it's dated. No closed captions again. I keep forgetting I need to look up that. I want to see if that's an extension I can get for Microsoft Edge. But without further ado, let's just get into it. Let's see. Boom. Hopefully we have no technical issues. Last time we had none. But my internet's been spotty, but ever since I reset my router, it's been a lot better. It's been a lot better. All right, here we go. First one's an hour. Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore, Maryland. Also, we haven't had anybody in the crowd really yet either, and I'm wondering when that will happen. We did have some members of the League of Women Voters, if I remember correctly, who were the ones that were who kind of orchestrate all the Carter versus Ford debates. They're the ones that kind of funded it. But they weren't there wasn't people cheering or stuff in the audience, but curious if we'll get that at any point tonight.
We're presenting these debates to provide citizens an opportunity to see and hear the candidates state their positions on important issues of concern to us all. Our moderator is Bill Moyers.
Hopefully the sound is good. Some of these have been
Ms. Hannafeld.
A little quiet. But...
My colleagues and I agreed to participate tonight, although the questioners are limited by the constraints of the format, because we thought with the League of Women Voters that it is desirable to seek a comparison of views on a few issues in a joint appearance.
I guess they're doing it again.
The next president
League of Women
Voters.
Voters.
Former Governor Ronald Reagan, the Republican Party candidate, and Congressman John Anderson, who is running as an independent, accepted the League of Women Voters' invitation to be here. President Carter declined. Mr. Reagan and Mr. Anderson will respond with their views on certain issues posed by questions from my colleagues. Carol Loomis of Fortune magazine.
Fortune
Daniel
magazine?
Greenberg, a syndicated columnist. Charles Cordry of the Baltimore Sun.
Hell yeah, Baltimore Sun.
Lee May of the Los Angeles Times. Jane Bryant Quinn of Newsweek, and Soma Golden of the New York Times.
So you have two of these are very corporate.
Submitted in advance to either the League.
I don't know about that this time, but I'm assuming so. Very corporate, pro-capitalist.
Gentlemen, thank you both for coming.
I guess I shouldn't say pro-capitalist, but just pro-business magazines.
Each panelist will ask a single question.
It's like Forbes.
You will have 2.5 minutes in which to respond. After you've stated your positions in those 2.5 minutes, each of you will have 1 minute and 15 seconds for response. At the close of the debate, each of you will have 3 minutes for closing remarks.
Is that the camera there? I think those are
we
cameras.
ask the convention center audience to abide by one simple ground rule. Please do not applaud or express approval or disapproval during the debate.
So we're not getting that.
You may do that on November 4th. Having won the toss of the coin, Mr. Anderson will respond to the first question from Carol Loomis.
Mr. Anderson, opinion polls show that the American public sees inflation as the country's #1 economic problem.
Okay, so...
Yet as individuals, they oppose cures that hurt
So
them
inflation is still an
personally.
issue. In the
Elected
Carter
officials
versus
have played along
Ford debate, that was a
by
big
promising
conversation
to cure
point.
Inflation,
Was inflation.
while backing away
It was like
from
7,
tough
almost
programs
8%.
that might hurt one special interest group.
Or sorry, that was
another,
unemployment rate.
and by actually
But the inflation was
adding
also high.
inflationary elements to the system, such as indexing. They have gone for what is politically popular rather than for what might work and amount to leadership. My question, and please be specific, is what politically unpopular measures are you willing to endorse, push, and stay with that might provide real progress in reducing inflation?
Well, Ms. Lomas, I think it's very appropriate that the first question in this first debate of Campaign 80 should relate to the economy of the country. Because it seems to me that the people who are watching us tonight, 221 million Americans, are truly concerned about the poor rate of performance of the American economy over the last 4 years. Now, Governor Reagan is not responsible for what has happened over the last 4 years, nor am I. The man who should be here tonight to respond to those charges chose not to attend. But I want to answer as specifically as I can the question that you have just put to me.
Early
Let
beef?
me tell you that I, first of all, oppose an election year tax cut. Whether it is the 10% across-the-board tax cut promised to the taxpayers by my opponent in this debate tonight, or whether it is the $27.5 billion tax cut promised on the 20th of August by President Carter, I simply think that when we are confronting a budget deficit this year, and this fiscal year will end in about 10 days.
More budget
we are
talk.
Confronted with the possibility of a deficit of $60 billion, perhaps as much as $63 billion, that simply would be irresponsible.
I go back to this. Does anyone give a fuck about the deficit? Does anyone care?
Once again, we will see the monetization of that debt.
I guess people always equate it with it being the economy's bad, but like
some hopeful signs, perhaps.
I feel like 90% of the time,
in the third quarter, that perhaps
it's just a bunch of political jargon.
We've also seen the rise in the rate of the
You just say that you just say deficit. We need to fight the deficit, and you get points.
Sure
I
sign
guess.
of inflation in the housing industry. What I would propose, and I proposed it way back in March when I was a candidate in my own state of Illinois. I proposed $11.3 billion specifically in cuts in the federal budget. I think we've got to have fiscal restraint. And I said at that time that one of the things that we could do that perhaps would save as much as $5 to $7 billion, according to one of the leading members of the House Budget Committee, was to recalculate the index that is used to determine the cost of living benefits that are paid to civil service retirees, to military retirees. That we ought to, in addition to that, we ought to pay those retirement benefits on the basis of once a year rather than twice a year and save $750 billion. In other words,
Anderson,
fiscal restraint,
your time
I think, is
up.
necessary.
Ms. Loomis?
Do you have time up already?
Reagan,
First
repeating the
question.
And I would ask you again to engage in as many specifics
I was
as
gonna
you
say,
possibly can.
I was gonna say, we haven't had too many like rule breaking in the other debates. We had a little bit on I think one of the last ones we did on Sunday there, which I think some of them like was cut off at one point. But we'll see if we get more tonight.
What politically unpopular measures are you willing to endorse, push?
What a
and
weird
stay with
question.
that might provide real progress.
What
in
politically
reducing inflation?
unpopular things are you willing to endorse?
I believe that the only unpopular measures actually that could be or would be applied would be unpopular with government and with those perhaps some special interest groups who are tied closely to government. I believe that inflation today is caused by government simply spending more than government takes in, at the same time that government is imposed upon business and industry, from the shopkeeper on the corner to the biggest
Here it comes.
industrial plant in America.
Are we gonna get trickled down?
Countless harassing regulations and punitive
Are we gonna get it
taxes
tonight?
that have reduced productivity at the same time.
Is that
they
something
have
he
increased
said, or
the
was it
cost
something
of
that was
production.
coined? I wonder.
And when you are reducing productivity at the same time that you are turning out printing press money in excessive amounts, you're causing inflation, and it isn't really higher prices, it's just you are reducing the value of the money, you are robbing the American people of their savings. And so the plan that I have proposed, and contrary to what John says, my plan is for a phased-in tax cut over a 3-year period, tax increase in depreciation allowances for business and industry to give them the capital to refurbish plant and equipment.
Oh my! He's admitting it.
Research and development, improved
See, that's what
technology.
we'll see. I know it's only the first 7 minutes, but I'm just saying I wanted to see, and in the first 7 minutes, he's basically gonna be like, he's honest. He's not bullshitting anybody. He didn't do some. That's the thing now. It's like there's a lot of bills and stuff passed to help, the wealthy and whatnot, but no one's like campaigning on it because they know it's not gonna get any votes. But you just do it on the side. You know what I mean? Or it's to make yourself rich. looking at, like, for example, when members of Congress's, husbands or wives or whatever, buying stocks and doing all that kind of stuff. And you also have lobbying as well. But they do on the down low. You know what I mean? But he's admitting it here, like, if we just give money back to the businesses, they'll do the right thing.
All of which we see our foreign competitors
we reduce the taxes,
and we have the greatest
we'll
percentage of outmoded industrial plant and equipment of any of the industrial nations. Produce more, have
increase more production,
and
increase surplus value.
This country,
he won't say the word surplus value,
their own
but
savings. Now, I know that this has been called inflationary by my opponent and by the man who isn't here tonight. But I don't see where it is inflationary to have people keep more of their earnings and spend it, and it isn't inflationary for government to take that money away from them and spend it on the things it wants to spend it on.
Yeah, I want him to mention any sort of cryptocurrency.
I believe we need incentive for the individual and for business and industry.
Do you think Reagan would have been pro-cryptocurrency if he was alive now?
With detailed backing, and which has been approved by a number of our leading economists in the country, is based on projections.
I mean, he was part of the biggest rug pull of all.
For the next 5 years.
Trickle-down economics,
that this
or Reaganomics.
Would, by 1983, result in
old
a
money
balanced
person.
Budget. We have to remember, when we talk a tax cut,
maybe
we're only talking about reducing a tax increase.
Does he have any kids? His kids would do it.
This administration has left us with a built-in tax increase that will amount to $86 billion next year.
Your time is up.
And $500 billion over the next 5.
Another time up. That's 2 time ups already.
More, in addition to saying that this is no time for a tax cut in view of the incipient signs of renewed inflation, in addition to calling for restraint in federal spending, 15 months ago, I also suggested we ought to have an emergency excise tax on gasoline. I say that because I think this year we will send $90 billion out of this country to pay for imported oil, even though those imports have been reduced. And since I first made that proposal 15 months ago, the price of gasoline, which was then 80 cents, has gone up to about $1.30. In other words, we've had a huge
that's pretty expensive for the 80s, I feel like.
50 cents a gallon since that time, and all of that increase has gone out of this country, or much of it, into the pockets of OPEC.
Because the minimum wage was
whereas I have proposed we
$1.
Put that tax on here.
What was the minimum wage in 1980?
Reduce our consumption of that imported oil, recycle those proceeds then back into the pockets of the American
I know
workers
in 1960 it was $1.50.
Their Social Security tax payments by 50%. That, I think, in addition, would be an anti-inflationary measure.
Minimum wage was $3.
The economy of this country.
$3.10.
Well, I cannot see where a 50-cent a gallon tax applied to gasoline would have changed the price of gasoline. It would still have gone up as much as it has, and the 50 cents would be added on top of that. And it would be a tax paid by the consumers.
It's almost 1/3 of your hourly income could be going to gasoline.
Well, why?
Not full all 1/3, but you know what I mean.
If you're going to give it back, why not leave it with it?
It's expensive.
And John spoke about 15 years ago in the position that or 15 months ago and what he believed in. 15 months ago, he was a co-signer and advocating the very tax cut that I am proposing, and said that that would be a forward step in fighting inflation and that it would be beneficial to the working people of this country.
The next question goes to Mr. Reagan from Daniel Greenberg.
Well, gentlemen, what I'd like to say first is I think the panel and the audience would appreciate responsiveness to the questions rather than repetitions of your campaign addresses.
Damn.
My question for the governor is,
dude, journalists are better back in the 70s and 80s, I've noticed. I feel like I don't remember debate questions being this
air, land,
like
and water.
He literally calling them out.
That we face
I feel like they don't do that now. Unless it's like targeting like Donald Trump specifically.
Limits.
You know what I mean?
I'd like to know specifically what changes you would encourage and require in American lifestyles, in automobile use, housing, land use, and general consumption to meet problems that aren't going to respond to campaign lullabies about minor conservation efforts and more production.
Well, I believe that conservation, of course, is worthy in and of itself.
Yeah, they try to be nice as possible. I only feel like they would like maybe attack Trump or whatever at some debates.
But I do not believe that conservation
fairly so, but
is the answer
not in the same way that they're doing here.
Because all you're doing then is staving off by a short time the day when you would come to the end of the energy supply. To say that we are limited and in a dangerous point in this country with regard to energy, I think, is to ignore the fact. The fact is,
like some of the journalists in the last debates,
there is more oil still there.
They would ask questions that like were like kind of contradicting like what they've said.
But it would require,
you know what I mean?
What is
like
known as secondary or tertiary efforts to bring it out.
Like I guess
the
they're
ground.
like instead of them doing gotchas, the
reserve,
candidates doing
known
gotchas against
supply.
themselves. I feel like the journalists are doing it
millions
more.
of acres of land that have been taken out of circulation by the government.
Which is what they should do.
For whatever
They should be
reason
challenging
they have,
both candidates
that is believed by the most knowledgeable oil geologists
as much as possible.
to contain probably more oil and natural gas than we have used so far since we drilled that first well 121 years ago. We have a coal supply that is equal to 50%.
Enough
of the
about
world's
coal.
supply,
God damn it.
good for centuries in this country. I grant you that prices may
We're
go up
good with
because
coal for a
as
couple
you go
centuries. Let's
further and have to
fucking
go
do it.
deeper, you are adding to the cost of production. We have nuclear power, which I believe with the safest, the most stringent of safety requirements, could meet our energy needs for the next
I wish David was here.
decades, while
David,
we go forward,
David always
exploring
loves
the
to
areas
like
of solar
make
power
fun of me because I'm like kind of
and other forms
anti-nuclear
of
power.
energy that might be renewable.
He's
and
always saying how
that
safe
would
it
not
is
be
and how.
exhaustible. All of these things can be done. When
And I'm
you
like,
stop
cool.
and think that
How about we
are
just do
only
solar?
living on 2%, at least.
How about
only
we do?
2%
We don't do anything
of the
that
possible,
potentially needs to be
possibility for
stored
oil
or
of the whole
has the
continental
possibility
shelf
of
around the United
harming the
States.
environment. How if we just
When you
didn't
stop
do
to
that?
think that the government has taken over 100 million
Maybe it's
acres
a
of
hot
land
take.
out of circulation in Alaska alone that is believed by geologists to contain much in the line of minerals and energy sources, then I think it is the government.
But David always sends
and
me
the government
memes
with its
about
own
like
restrictions and
pro-nuclear power
regulations
memes. I don't know if
that
that's a
created
genre, but
the
it is.
energy
I
crisis,
guess
that we
it's
are
always funny to
indeed
me.
an energy-rich nation.
I would like to say at this point that the candidates requested the same questions to be repeated for the sake of precision on the part of the interrogator. So, Mr. Greenberg, you may address.
Damn, they're calling it an
Mr.
interrogation.
Anderson, I'd
Hell
like
yeah.
to know specifically what changes you would encourage and require in American lifestyles, in automobile use, housing, land use, and consumption.
Abolish
to meet problems
cars.
that aren't going to respond to campaign lullabies about minor conservation efforts and more production.
Well, Mr. Greenberg, I simply cannot allow to go unpassed the statements that have just been made by Mr. Reagan, who once
Mickey.
again has demonstrated, I think, a total misunderstanding of the energy crisis that confronts not only this country but the world, when he suggests that we have 27 years supply of natural gas, 47 years supply of oil, and all the rest, and that we really, all we have to do is to get the government off the back of the oil industry, and that's going to be enough. I agree with what I think is the major premise of your question, sir, that we are going to have to create a new conservation ethic in the minds of the American people. And that's simply why I proposed 15 months ago the emergency excise tax on gasoline that I did. I did it as a security measure, to be sure, because I would rather see us reduce the consumption of imported oil than have to send American boys to fight in the Persian Gulf. But at the same time, I think
Mickey's
it's going
just
to take
sitting
a
on the
dramatic
couch,
measure
like,
of that
over
kind
the end of it,
to convince the American
and just
people
barking.
that we will have to reduce.
He acts like he's a guard dog, but he just is lazy about
We
it.
simply cannot have people
better be at the door,
sitting
Mark.
one behind the wheel of a car and these
Sit on the
long
couch and
traffic
yell at me.
jams going in and out of our great cities. We are going to have to resort to van pooling, to carpooling. We're going to have to develop better community transportation
Don't worry, we
systems
got Uber.
so that with buses and light rail, we can replace the private automobile in those places where it clearly
Baltimore
is not
light rail.
energy efficient. I think that
just
with
only goes
respect
north
to,
and south.
Housing, when we are consuming, even though our per capita income today is about the same as that of the Federal Republic of Germany, we are consuming about, by a factor of 2, the amount of energy that they consume in that country. Surely there are things that we can do.
Aren't we
in the
like
retrofitting,
twice the
in
size in
redesign
population
of our
now?
homes, not only of our houses, but of our commercial structures as well, that will make it possible for us to
Everyone needs to
achieve.
turn off their
According
lights
to one
after 8
study
o'clock.
that was published a short
New
time
law.
ago, the Harvard Business School study indicated that just in the commercial sector alone of the economy, we could save between 30 and 40% of the energy that we consume in this country today. So I think, yes, we will have to change in a very appreciable way.
Don't
some of the
shower for a
lifestyles
week.
that we now enjoy.
Mr. Reagan.
Well, as I've said, I am not an enemy of conservation. I wouldn't be called a
doubt it.
conservative if I were. But
shut
when
up.
my figures are challenged, as the president
Dude,
himself
probably people in the
challenged them,
80s probably
after
loved
I
that.
made them,
Loved that joke.
I
They're
think it
like,
should
oh
be
my
called to the
God.
attention of John and the others here that my
Like knowing
figures
what
are the
boomers
figures
laugh at on
of the
Facebook now,
Department of Energy,
they love that joke.
which has not been overly optimistic in recent years as to how much supply we have left. That is the same government that in 1920 told us we only had enough oil left for 13 years, and 19 years later told us we only had enough left for another 15 years.
Yeah, I wish that was the
As for
case.
saving
I kind of
energy and
do.
conserving, the American people haven't been doing badly at that. Because in industry today, we're producing more over the last several years and at 12% less use of energy than we were back in about 1973.
You just said we were like lacking production.
And motorists are using
that was what was
8%
causing
less
inflation.
than they were.
Now we're like the
back
most
at that
productive.
time of the oil embargo. So I think we are proving that we can go forward with conservation and benefit from that, but also I think it is safe to say that we do.
I want to look up how many what movies Reagan has been in, and if I recognize any of them.
Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Greenberg, I think my opponent in this debate tonight is overlooking one other very important fact, and that is that we cannot look at this as simply a national problem. Even though it's true that perhaps between now and the end of the
he's in a
decade,
bunch of like
our total
westerns.
consumption of oil may not increase by more than perhaps 1 million or 2 barrels of oil a day. The rest of the Western world, we are told, may see
Bunch
its
of war
consumption
films.
increase from 51 million barrels to about 66 million. And that additional 15 million barrels is going to cause scarcity. It is going to cause scarcity in world markets because there are at least 5 reputable studies, one even by the American Petroleum Institute itself, that I think clearly indicates that somewhere along around the end of the
I love that
decade,
when you look up
total
Ronald Reagan
world demand for oil
on Google,
is simply going to exceed
this is the
total
picture.
available supplies. I think that conservation.
He's like doing what
like
freaking
necessary, and we had better begin to
like
plan for
alt-right
that
Nazis do
now rather than later.
as like their call
This question
sign.
goes to you, Mr. Anderson, from Charles Cordry.
Mr. Anderson, you and Mr. Reagan both speak for better defense, for stronger defense, and for programs that would mean spending more money. You do not, either of you, however, come to grips with the fundamental problem of manning the forces, of who shall serve and how the burden will be distributed. This will surely
he was
be
president
a
of the
critical
Screen
issue in
Actors
the next
Guild, actually,
presidential
from
term.
47 to 52.
You both oppose the draft. The questions are, how would you fill the understrength combat forces with numbers and quality without reviving conscription? And will you commit yourself here tonight, should you become the Commander-in-Chief, to propose a draft, however unpopular, if it becomes clear that voluntary means are not working?
Mr. Cordry, I am well aware of the present deficiencies in the armed forces.
I will not impose
of
a
this
draft.
country.
That's the answer.
When you have a report, as we did recently, that 6 out of 10 CONUS divisions in this country, continental United States Army divisions, simply could not pass a readiness test, that 2 out of 3 divisions that were to be allocated to the so-called rapid deployment force could not meet a readiness test, and in most cases, that failure to meet the test was because of a lack of manning requirements, an inability to fill many of the slots in those divisions. Yes, I have seen figures that indicate that perhaps as of September 1980, this very month, that there is a shortage of about 104,000 in the ranks between E4 and E9. And there were reports, public reports not long ago, about ships that could not leave American ports because of a lack of crews. I talked to one of the leading former chiefs of naval operations.
Well, it's because you're not advertising in the right places.
Who told me about 25,000
You're not advertising on Twitch
being short. But I think that that is clearly related to the fact that going back to the time when the all-volunteer Army was created in 1973, and I worked hard.
I used to get so many
supported
Army ads
we
and stuff,
simply
Marine
have
ads.
failed to keep pace with
Put
the
that
cost
shit in
of
front of a
living.
Marvel movie, yeah.
And today,
You want to be
on
fucking
the average,
Iron Man?
The average serviceman
Sign
is
up
at
for the
least
Marines.
15%, and I happen to think that's a very modest estimate. 15% below what has happened to the cost of living over that period of time. And as a result, the families of some of our young servicemen are on food stamps today, and I think that's shocking. It's shameful. So yes, I told the American Legion National Convention, the VFW National Convention, when I spoke to each of those bodies, I outlined a very specific program of increasing pay and allowances, re-enlistment bonuses. That only makes sense. But I would leave you with this thought, sir, to be quite specific in my answer to your question, that of course, to protect the vital interests of this country,
awful answer.
if that became impossible, if I could not, despite the very best efforts that I asked the Congress to put forward.
What war are we going in where we need
raise those pay and incentives and allowances? Of course, I would
the answer is always no.
Go undefended.
Mr. Cordry.
Mr. Reagan, I will just repeat the two questions. How would you fill the understrength combat forces with numbers and with quality?
I guess that was the first part of the question. I didn't hear that part.
And will you commit yourself here tonight?
I always thought the
should
question,
you become the commander-in-chief,
you will never vote
for
a draft.
I've
said it before. I will go to jail
if it becomes
before I go
that voluntary
in the Army.
means are not solving our manpower problems.
Mr. Cordray,
I don't care.
it's a shame now that there are only two of us here.
I will. I mean, I think we're past the age where we'd be drafted. It's weird they always go after the young.
Particular issue, and the only
my brother and I talked about this, and he's 5 years younger than me. And I don't remember when it came up, but
I too believe
he's like, yeah, if we had a draft, I would be drafted.
As a matter of fact, today the
and I'm like,
of non-commissioned officers that John mentioned are such.
And I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, that's true, because that's what they do. They give the youngest sibling, and I'm like, shouldn't it be the other way around? I've had more life.
I believe the answer lies in just recognizing human nature.
You know what I mean? Like, I feel like I should be the one to be drafted if we're doing that.
Recognize
for pulling
that
straws.
We have a voluntary military. We are asking for men and women to join the military as a career.
I almost did ROTC too, and I went to Niagara University.
And a young man is
for a hot second that almost happened. Thank God.
Maintenance of a $25 million aircraft, working 100 hours a week at times, and he's earning less for himself and his family.
Yeah, Mulan had it right.
Away from his family than he could earn if he were in one of the most menial jobs, working 40 hours a week here at home. As an aide to enlistment, we had an aide. 46% of the people who enlisted in the voluntary military up until 1977 said they did so for one particular reason: the GI Bill of Rights, the fact that by serving in the military, they could provide for a future college education. In 1977, we took that away from the military. That meant immediately.
And nowadays, it's like you can get your associates, and you can be an officer.
So I think it is a case of pay scale
for free,
of recognizing that if we're going to have young men
by signing this contract that you're at least doing 20 years,
dealing with this sophisticated equipment,
and you'll be sent to wherever we send you.
Let's go out and have a pay scale that is
better not have any
sacrifice that we're asking of them. Along with
any relationships with anybody.
Need something else that has been allowed to deteriorate.
Better get used to being homesick.
We need a 1 million man active reserve that could be called up on an instant's notice, and that would be also
no loose ends,
ready to use that
do it for
type
God.
of equipment. Both of these, I think, would respond to the proper kind of incentives that we could offer these people. The other day,
if we have a draft, we should just find everyone who complained about Kaepernick kneeling on Twitter and send them first, in my opinion.
Sorry.
I'll catch up with it later.
You can finish that after it's over. Mr. Anderson?
Mr. Morris, I must say that I think I have a better opportunity.
I want him to be like, Reagan's movies sucked.
To pay
Just like
what admittedly will be very, very substantial sums of money. We signed one bill, or we passed one bill just a couple of weeks ago in the House of Representatives for $500 million, $500 million. That is just a down payment, in my opinion. But unlike Governor Reagan, I do not support a boondoggle like the MX missile. I've just gotten a report from the Air Force that indicates that the 30-year life cycle cost of that system is going to be $100 billion. The initial cost is about $54 billion, and then when you add in the additional costs, not only the construction of the system, the missiles and the personnel and so on, when you add in the additional costs over the life cycle of that system, over $100 billion. I would propose to save the taxpayers of this country from that kind of costly boondoggle.
Mr. Reagan?
Boondoggle.
Well, let me just say that with regard to that same missile system, I happen to support and believe in the missile itself, but that's not the $54 billion cost that John is talking about. He's talking about that fantastic
That's always,
plan
this is
of
a
the
trope too, I've
administration to
noticed.
take thousands
in all the
and thousands
debates.
of square miles.
Anytime
out
anyone
in the
says something is going to be
western
this
states.
expensive or
And,
not this
first he was gonna dig a
expensive, the other
racetrack and
guy
have
is
it going
always
around
like,
on the racetrack, so
he's
it meets the
lying.
requirements
It's
of
going to
SALT
be
2
expensive, or it
And now
will
he's
raise
decided to have
inflation.
a straight up and down thing, so it can be both verifiable and yet hideable from the Soviet Union. We
It's
need
just
the
an easy
missile, I
comeback.
think,
You can just say they're lying.
because we are so
And you can
out of
lie about it
balance
too.
strategically.
You can lie about
that
the lie.
We lack a deterrent to a possible first assault. But I am not in favor of the plan that is so costly. And therefore, if I only had another second left, I'd say that that high school class in a military training, 40 of its 80 graduates last year entered the United States Service Academies, West Point, Annapolis, and the Air Force Academy. And to see those young men made me very proud, and to realize that there are young people in this country that are prepared to go into that kind of a career in service of their country.
This question comes to you, Mr. Reagan, from my colleague Lee May.
Mr. Reagan, the military is not the only area.
I've noticed
in
all the
crisis.
presidential candidates
American
up until this
cities
point
are
that we've watched
physically wearing
all
out
fought in World War
as
II
housing,
in some
streets,
capacity or served during World War
sewers,
II.
and budgets all fall apart. And all of this is piled upon the emotional strain that comes from refugees and racial confrontations. Now, I'm wondering, what specific plans do you have for federal involvement in saving our cities from these physical and emotional crises? And how would you carry out those plans, in addition to raising military pay, without going against your pledge of fiscal restraint?
I don't think I'd have to go against that pledge. I think one of the problems today with the cities is federal aid. The mayors that I've talked to in some of our leading cities tell me that the federal grants that come for a specific cause or a specific objective come with such red tape, such priorities established by a bureaucracy in Washington, that the local government's hands are tied with regard to using that money as they feel it could best be used and for what they think might be the top priority. If they had that money without those government restrictions, every one of them has told me they could make great savings and make far greater use of the money. What I have been advocating is, why don't we start with the federal government turning back tax sources to states and local governments, as well as the responsibilities for those programs. 75% of the people live in the cities. I don't know of a city in America that doesn't have the kind of problems you're talking about. But where are we getting the money that the federal government is putting out to help them? New York is being taxed for money that will then go to Detroit. But Detroit is being taxed for money that, let's say, will go to Chicago, while Chicago is being taxed to help with the problems in Philadelphia. Wouldn't it make a lot more sense if the government let them keep their own money there in the first place? But there are other things that we can do with the inner cities. And I have talked of
tough on crime,
having zones in those cities that are run down, where there's a high percentage of people on welfare.
Oh, man.
And offer tax incentives. The government isn't getting a tax now from businesses there because they aren't there, or from individuals who are on welfare rather than working. And why don't we offer incentives for business and industry to start up in those zones? Give them a tax moratorium for a period if they build and develop there. The individuals that would then get jobs, give them a break that encourages them to leave the social welfare programs and go to work. We could have an urban
first crowd shot
homestead act. We've got thousands and thousands of homes owned by government, boarded up, being vandalized, that have been taken in mortgage foreclosures. What if we had a homestead act and said to the people, for $1 we sell you this house, all you have to do is agree to refurbish it, make it habitable, and live in it, just as 100 or more years ago we did with the open land in this country.
Yeah, that sounds like more like socialism than anything.
Homesteading.
Mr. May?
Just kidding.
Mr. Anderson, let me ask you.
$1.
What specific plans
I'll do that
you
now,
have
I'm not gonna
for
lie.
federal involvement in saving cities from the physical
Only thing I've
and
agreed with
emotional
Reagan on. Give me
crises
a
that
house for
confront them?
$1. Yes.
And how would you carry out those plans, in addition to
As long as it's
raising
not
military pay, without
infested
going
with
against
rodents
your
or something,
pledge of fiscal
or has like
restraint?
radon in it?
Mr. May, I recently
That'd be a
saw
little sketched out.
Princeton
Like, why are you
University
selling me this
study
for $1? You know?
that indicated that the cities of America, the large cities of this country, are in worse shape today than they were in 1960. It seems to totally belie the claim that I heard President Carter make a few days ago, that he was the first president that had come forth with a real urban strategy to meet the problems of urban America. Incidentally, just this past week, the crown jewel in that program that he had devised was stolen, I guess, because a conference committee turned down the ambitious plan that he had to increase the amount of money that would be available to the Economic Development Administration for loan guarantees and direct loans and credits. I'm happy to say that in contrast to that, the Anderson-Lucy Platform for America program for the 80s has devoted considerable time and in very specific detail. We have talked about two things that ought to be done to aid urban America. We call, first of all, for the creation of a $4 billion urban reinvestment trust fund to do exactly what you spoke about in your question, to rebuild the streets, to rebuild the cities,
fix the potholes,
the leaking water mains. I was in North Pittsburgh, I think it was a few weeks ago on my campaign. The water mains in that city had begun to leak, and literally there wasn't money available to fix them. And until we can begin to recreate the basic infrastructure of the great cities of America, particularly in the upper Midwest and in the Northeast, they simply are not going to provide the kind of economic climate that will enable them to retain industry, enable them to retain the kind of solid industrial base that they need so that they can provide jobs. We have also provided in our program for a $4 billion community trust fund, and we've told you where the money is coming from. It's going to come from the dedication by 1984 of the excise revenues that today are being collected by the federal government on alcohol and tobacco. That money, I think, ought to be put into rebuilding the base of our cities. In addition to that,
make the drunks pay for the roads.
To re-employ the
Vote
youth
for me.
in our cities would be very high on my priority list. Both the Youth Opportunities Act of 1980 and a $1 billion program that I would recommend to put youth to work in energy projects, in conservation projects, in projects that would carry out some of the great national goals of our country.
Mr. Reagan, your response?
Yes, John claims that he is making plain where the money will come from. It will come from the pockets of the people. It will come from the pockets of the people who are living in those very areas. And the problem is, with governments, federal, state, and local, taking 44 cents out of every dollar earned, that the federal government has preempted too many of the tax sources. And if the cities, if Pittsburgh does not have the money to fix the leaking water mains, it's because the federal government is preempted. Now, the federal government is going to turn around and say, oh, you have this problem, we will now hand you the money to do it. But the federal government doesn't make money. It just takes it from the people. And in my view, this is not the answer to the problem. Stand in the South Bronx as I did in the spot where Jimmy Carter made his promise that he was going to, with multi-billion-dollar programs, refurbish that area that looks like bombed-out London in World War II. I stood there and I met the people and I heard them ask just for something that would give them hope. And I believe that, well, all of the promises have been broken. They've never been carried out. But I believe that my plan might offer an opportunity for that if we would move into those areas and encourage with the tax incentives the private sector to develop and to create the jobs for the people.
Mr. Anderson?
Well, of course, where has the private sector been, Governor Reagan, during the years that our cities have been deteriorating? It seems to me that to deny the responsibility of the federal government to do something about our crumbling cities is to deny the opportunity, for one thing, to 55% of the black population of our country that is locked within the inner cities of the metropolitan areas of our country. We simply cannot ignore the fact that in those cities today, we have 55% youth unemployment among black and Hispanic youth. And why is that? It's because they have lost their industry. Why have they lost their industry? Is because they no longer present the kind of viable economic climate that makes it possible for industry to remain there or to locate there. I think government has a responsibility to find jobs for the youth of this country, and that the place to start is to assist in the very important and necessary task of helping cities rebuild.
Jane Bryant Quinn has the next question for you, Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Anderson, many voters are very worried that tax cuts, nice
I want to
as
get
they
one of
are,
those
will
microphones
actually
that they
add to
have.
inflation. And many eminent conservatives have testified that even business tax cuts, as you have proposed,
I want some old school
can be
microphones. Everyone's
inflationary
having the
as
new
long as we
shit. I
have a
want the
budget
old
deficit.
shit.
Now, Mr. Reagan has mentioned that he put out a
Probably wouldn't be
five-year
high quality,
economic
though.
forecast, which indeed he did, but it contained no inflation number. You have published a detailed program, but it too doesn't have any hard numbers on it about how these things work with inflation. So I would like to ask you if you will commit to publish specific forecasts within 2 weeks so that the voters can absorb them and understand them and analyze them.
Wonder if that's for
showing
stereo, if there's
exactly
two places
what
the
all these
audio is going
problems
into.
you've mentioned tonight on energy, on
I think
defense,
one
on
of them,
cities,
one of the
how
microphones
these
might be
impact on inflation
for like
and what inflation is actually going to be over 5 years.
for the
Ms. Quinn, I
auditorium
would
they're
be
in,
very
and the other
happy
one's
to
for like,
accept
yeah,
the
like
challenge of your
recorded
question
for
tonight.
television, radio.
Tell the
maybe. I
voters
don't know.
of this country exactly what I think it's going to cost.
But I don't know if they would give like some
Because I
weird
believe
frequency
that
thing. I
all
don't
too
know.
often in past elections, politicians have simply been
But they have like the
promising
little
people things that
things
they
on their
cannot
tie
deliver.
for the mics.
When these presidential debates were held just 4 years ago, I remember
Yeah, the lapel
incumbent
mics, yeah,
president
yeah.
who was willing to debate, President Ford.
They probably aren't too
American
expensive
people that
because
they
I feel like there wouldn't be like a
simply
demand
ought
for them
not
unless
to
there's
vote
not
for
that many
somebody who
left. But
promised more than they
like,
could
who's really
deliver.
buying those? You know?
Well, we've seen what has happened. We haven't gotten either the economies in
And it looks like it's still wired
because
because I think it goes underneath the
we haven't
tie.
gotten the 4% inflation that we were supposed to get at
Maybe
the
I'm-
end of Mr.
maybe I'm
Carter's
wrong.
first term. Instead, we had, I think, in the second quarter, a consumer price index.
So where does the
registering
cord go?
around
Does it-
12%.
does it go-
And nobody really knows with the latest increase in the wholesale
Does it
price
go down their
index,
pant leg?
that's about 18% on an annualized basis, what it's going to be. Let me say this. I
Think it's
think
behind
my
them?
programs are far less inflationary than those of Governor Reagan, his own running mate. When he was running,
He's
for the
a little- he
presidency,
comes
said that
across a
they would
little, like,
cost,
aggressive, doesn't he?
30% inflation inside of 2 years, and he
Like a little bit
cited
of,
his leading economic advisor,
a little energy
distinguished
behind him. I kinda
economist
dig it,
Paul
though.
McAvoy, as the source of that information.
I don't necessarily agree with everything he said,
Voodoo
but-
economics. I've been very careful. I have
Listen.
been very careful in saying that what I'm going to do is to bring federal spending under control first. I would like to stand here and promise the American people a tax cut, as Governor Reagan has done, but you know, it's gotten to be about a $122 difference. Somebody worked it out, and they figured out that between the tax cut that Governor Reagan is promising the American people and the tax cut that Jimmy Carter is promising in 1981, his is worth about $122 more. So you, dear voters, are out there on the auction block, and these two candidates are bidding for your votes. And one is going to give you $122 more if you happen to be in that range of about a $20,000 a year income. I'm going to wait until I see that that inflation rate is going down before I even begin to phase in the business tax cuts that I've talked about. But I think by improving productivity, they would be far less inflationary than the consumption-oriented tax cut that Governor Reagan is
I like that
recommending.
word, inflationary.
Ms. Quinn?
Mr. Anderson, I'll call you for that forecast. Mr. Reagan, will you publish specific forecasts within 2 weeks so that the voters can have time to analyze and absorb them before
I will
the
post
election?
it on Twitter at a
showing
later date.
exactly what all these things you've discussed tonight for energy, cities, and defense mean for inflation over the next 5 years.
Ms. Quinn, I don't have to. I've done it. We have a backup paper to my economic speech of a couple of weeks ago in Chicago that gives all of the figures. And we used, yes, we used the Senate Budget Committee's projections for 5 years, which are based on an average inflation rate of 7.5%, which I think that under our plan can be eliminated. And eliminated
You
probably
think,
more
or are
quickly
you
than our
sure?
plan, but we wanted to be so conservative with it that people would
My
see
throat's
how-
feeling a little
how well
inflationary.
it could be done. Now, John's been in the Congress for 20 years.
I guess that would,
John
to me,
tells
would be
us that
like
first
your
we've got
throat
to
isn't
reduce
like
spending
inflammatory,
before we
which
can
is the
reduce
joke,
taxes.
but like it'd be like
But
your
if you've
throat
got a
is
kid that's extravagant, you
swelling
can
up.
lecture him all you want
It's inflationary.
about his extravagance, or you can cut his allowance
This balloon is
and achieve the
inflationary.
same end much quicker. The government has never reduced. Government
He's
does
getting
not
laughs,
tax
and none of
enough
his
to get
jokes
the
are
money
funny.
it needs. Government always needs.
Is that
the
how he
money
got
it
to?
gets.
Is
And
that how
when
he
John
won?
talks about
It was
his
just funny. I'm
non-inflationary
telling you.
plan, as far as I have been able to learn,
Based
there are
off the
88
boomers'
proposals
humor on
in it that
Facebook.
call for
They find this shit funny. And
programs.
Reagan knew.
Now, I speak with some confidence of our plan.
Oh my God!
Because I took over a state, California.
I should put Reagan quotes
10% of the population
on
of this
those
nation,
Minion memes, and they would probably do numbers.
Would be the 7th ranking
They probably do numbers on
power in the
Facebook.
world. And that state, we controlled.
Like I don't say it's
we
from
cut
Reagan,
the
but
rate
just
of
like
increase
put it in quotes.
In half.
Maybe
but at the same time,
simplify
we gave
it.
back to the people of California in tax
And then you just do
rebates,
like
tax
reshare
cuts,
if you agree.
tax cuts, $5 billion,
Comment down
$700
below if you
million.
agree.
I vetoed 993 measures without having a veto overturned. And among those vetoes, I
Reagan
vetoed
a lot of
and the funny thing
bills
was
in his
California,
terms.
Which is normally above
when we were looking up the other day how many people vetoed. FDR still holds at like 600, which is crazy.
Below
But
the national average.
Reagan was up there, if I remember correctly.
Unemployment. We have considered inflation in our figures. We deliberately
FDR vetoed like 650 something.
I believe the budget
he didn't give a fuck.
Be balanced by 1982 or 1983, and it is a combination.
Which also shows to me, in like I think the next highest was like 100 or something.
That Carter has built into
and I know he did 4 terms, but even if you break that up,
that he's going to get
that shows that Congress was actually like at least putting bills into place.
For additional programs.
Nowadays, like a president only does maybe like 10.
We believe that
maybe
that's too much additional money to take out of the pockets of the
I think it just shows like how much I feel like our government doesn't do shit.
I'm not here to debate Governor Reagan's record as governor. This is 1980, not 1966. But I do know that despite his pledge to reduce state government spending, that it rose from $4.6 billion when he took office in 1967 to $10.2 billion during his 8 years in office. Spending, in other words, more than doubled, and it rose at a faster rate than spending was rising in the federal government. But on his very optimistic figures about his tax cut producing a balanced budget by 1983, and the fact that he is using, he says, the figures of the Senate Budget Committee, that Senate Budget Committee report does not accommodate all of the Reagan defense plans. It doesn't accommodate the expenditures that he calls for accelerated development and deployment of a new manned strategic bomber, for a permanent fleet in the Indian Ocean, for the restoration.
I forget how much of that Reagan like escalated the Cold War. The Cold War was a little bit quiet at this point through the 70s.
Aircraft interceptor.
That Reagan's like, nah.
In other words, I have seen his program costed out to the point where it would amount to more than $300
Reagan
billion
loves
just for the
his
military.
bombers.
I think the figures that he has given are simply not going to stand up.
Would you have a comment, Mr. Reagan?
Well, some people look up figures and some people make up figures. And John has just made up some very
People are laughing.
Figures.
They're not supposed to laugh.
We took the Senate report.
Not supposed to give any response.
But we did factor in our own ideas with regard to increases in the projected military spending that we believe would.
Some people make up figures and some people look up figures.
Now, also with regard to the figures about California.
Some collect action figures.
The truth of the matter is, we did cut the increase in spending in half. John doesn't quite realize he's never held an executive position of that kind, and I think being governor of California is probably the closest thing to the presidency, if that's possible, of any executive job in America today, because it is the most populous state. And
I would say vice president, but okay.
That we reduced in proportion to other states the per capita spending, the per capita size of government. We only increased the size of government 1/12 what it had increased in the preceding 8 years. And one journal, the San Francisco Chronicle, a respected newspaper, said there was no question about the fact that Governor Reagan had prevented the state of California from
talking in
bankrupt.
third person.
Our final
Governor Reagan, he's such a good guy.
Soma Golden, and it's directed to Mr. Reagan.
I'd like to switch the focus from inflation to God. This week, Cardinal Medeiros of Boston warned Catholics that it's sinful to vote for candidates who favor abortion. This did not defeat the 2 men he opposed, but it did raise questions about the role of church and state. You, Mr. Reagan, have endorsed the participation of fundamentalist churches in your campaign. And you, Mr. Anderson, have tried 3 times to amend the Constitution to recognize the, quote, law and authority, unquote, of Jesus
it's about God,
Christ.
not woman.
My question, do you approve of the church's actions this week in Boston? And should a president be guided by organized religion on issues like abortion, equal rights, and defense spending?
Mr. Reagan.
Mr. Reagan.
Oh, it's my question. Well, whether I agree or disagree with some individual or what he may say or how he may say it, I don't think there's any way that we can suggest that because people believe in God and go to church, that they should not want reflected in those people and those causes they support their own belief in morality and in the high traditions and principles which we've abandoned so much in this country. Going around this country, I think that I have found a great hunger in America for a spiritual revival.
Because everyone's actually poor and
starving.
starving.
That law must be
Great
based
hunger.
on a higher law. For a return to traditions and values that we once had. Our government, in its most sacred documents, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and all, speak of man being created.
I'm so sick of caring about what a piece of paper
that
says.
we're a nation under God. Now, I have thought for a long time that too many of our churches have been too reluctant to speak up in behalf of what they believe is proper in government, and they have been too lax in interfering in recent years with government's invasion of the family itself.
This is crazy because, for 500 years, the Catholic Church was involved in every government, every form of government in Europe, in other continents.
I won't take a position on that. But
is that what he wants to go back to?
But no one in this country should be denied the right to express themselves or to even try to persuade others to follow their lead. That's what elections are all about.
Unless you're a communist, then you go to jail.
Okay, I would point out that churches are tax-exempt institutions.
Yeah. There you go. See, that's journalism. That's what you should be saying.
You approve the church's action this week in Boston.
All right, let's move on. That's usually that's what journalists do in debates now, I feel like.
On issues like abortion, equal rights, and defense spending.
Ms. Golden, certainly the church has the right to take a position on moral issues.
The churches are still frickin' tax exempt.
Occurred in the case that you mentioned, that specific case, to try to tell the parishioners of any church, of any denomination, how they should vote or for whom they should vote, I think violates the principle of separation of church and state.
Thank you very much.
Now, Governor Reagan is running on a platform that calls for a constitutional amendment banning abortion. I think that is a moral issue that ought to be left to the freedom of conscience of the individual. And for the state to interfere,
we gotta let Biden speak. We'll push him left.
And tell a woman that she must carry that pregnancy to term, regardless of her personal belief. That, I think, violates freedom of conscience as much as anything that I can think of. And he is also running on a platform that suggests a litmus test for the selection of judges. That only judges that hold a certain, quotes, view on the
thanks for the follow.
Of family
Appreciate
life
it.
ought to be appointed to the federal judiciary, one of the three great independent branches of our government. No, I believe in freedom of choice. I don't believe in constitutional amendments that would interfere with that. I don't believe in trying to legislate new tests for the selection of the federal judiciary. On the amendment that you mentioned, I abandoned it 15 years.
The idea of Biden being a computer would be pretty cool, actually.
That it was a mistake for me or anyone to ever try to put the Judeo-Christian heritage of this country, important as it is, and important as my religious faith is to me.
Biden is...
It's a very deeply
just an old one, like a one that's still running on dial-up.
Pluralistic society of ours
has AOL on it.
Any definition, whatever, of what that belief should be is wrong. And so not once but twice in 1971, I voted on the floor of the House of Representatives against a constitutional amendment that tried to bring prayer back into the public schools. I think Mother ought to whisper to Johnny and to Susie
the last debate
as they
we were
button
watching.
their coats in the morning and leave for the classroom, be sure to say a prayer before you start your day's work. But I don't think that the state, the Board of Regents, a Board of Education, or any state official should try to compose that prayer for a child to recite.
Mr. Reagan.
The litmus test that John says is in the Republican platform says no more than the judges to be appointed should have a respect for innocent life. Now, I don't think that's a bad idea. I think all of us should have a respect for innocent life.
Unless it's the gay community when they're all dying
of abortion,
when the AIDS pandemic was hitting.
Not being considered at
right,
all.
Reagan?
That's the one who's being aborted.
Or those don't count.
I've noticed that everybody that is for abortion has already been born.
What? Oh my God.
I
Shut
think
up.
that technically, I know this is a difficult and an emotional problem, and many people sincerely feel on both sides of this.
What kind of...
But I do believe that maybe we could
It's
find
boomer
the
humor.
answer
That's what Reagan is.
through
I
medical
figured it
evidence
out.
if we would determine once and for all.
That's how this guy
Is an
freaking
unborn
landslided
child
for
a human being?
2 elections in
I
the
happen
80s.
to believe it is.
He's just boomer humor.
Mr. Anderson?
God
I
damn
also
it.
think that that unborn child has a right to be wanted. And I also believe, sir, that the most personal, intimate decision that any woman is ever called upon to make is a decision as to whether or not she shall carry a pregnancy to term. And for the state to interfere in that decision, under whatever guise and with whatever rationale, for the state to try to take over in that situation and by edict command what the individual shall do and substitute itself for that individual's conscience, for her right to consult her rabbi, her minister, her priest, her doctor, any other counselor of her choice, I think goes beyond what we want to ever see accomplished in this country if we really believe in the First Amendment, if we really believe in freedom of choice and the right of the individual.
That's not the First
Mr. Reagan,
Amendment.
you now have 3 minutes
Freedom of
for
choice. It's not the
closing
First Amendment.
remarks.
Before beginning my closing remarks here, I would just like
Freedom
to
of
remark
choice.
a concern that I have that we have criticized the failures of the Carter policy here rather considerably, both of us this evening, and there might be some feeling of unfairness about this because he was not here to respond. But I believe it would have been much more unfair
You already roasted him.
to have had John Anderson denied the right to participate in this debate. And I want to express my appreciation to the League of Women Voters for adopting a course with which I believe the great majority of Americans are in agreement.
Except
Now as to my closing
except this will
remarks,
never happen again.
I've always believed...
Well, I guess it would happen with Perot, but like...
This land was
Imagine
placed
if they had
between the
independents
two
on
great
stage
oceans by
who are
some
polling...
divine
Yeah, I'm
plan.
curious what
It was placed
Anderson
here
was
to be
polling
found
at this
by a
point.
special kind of people. People who had a
Because like they
special
don't
love
have
for
Green
freedom
Party candidates or
and who had the
Libertarian
courage
Party
to
candidates
uproot
at
themselves and leave
presidential
hearth and
debates.
homeland and come to what in
And
the
the reasonings are
beginning was
usually
the
their
most
polling numbers are low
undeveloped
or whatever, which
wilderness
whatever.
possible. We came from 100 different corners.
Yeah, I'm curious
of
what
the
their
earth.
gun
We spoke a multitude of
what their
tongues.
gun opinions are.
Landed on this eastern shore and then went out over the mountains and the prairies and the deserts and the far western mountains to the Pacific, building cities and towns
Someone's
and
yelling.
farms and schools and churches.
You hear that?
If wind,
Ah!
water, or fire destroyed them, we built them again. And in so doing, at the same time,
The
we built a
fangirl.
new
Yeah.
breed of human
I love you,
called an
Reagan.
American. A proud, an independent, and a most compassionate individual.
It's a
for the
Reagan
most part.
maniac? Reagan maniac?
200 years ago, Tom Paine, when the
What do they
13
call their
tiny
fans? You
colonies
know,
were
you have
trying
Bernie
to become a
Bros.
nation,
What do you call
said,
the Reagan
We
fans?
have it in our power to begin the world over again. Today we're confronted with the
Oh, is this
horrendous problems that we've
Is this
discussed
the
here
end?
tonight.
I think it is.
And some people in high
Closing
positions
statements.
of leadership tell us that the answer is to retreat, that the best is over, that we must cut back, that we must share in an ever-increasing scarcity, that we must, in the failure to be able to protect our national security as it is today, we must not be provocative to any possible adversary. Well, we, the living Americans, have gone through 4 wars. We've gone through a Great Depression in our lifetime that literally was worldwide and almost brought us to our knees. But we
Yeah,
came
I know you
through
can
all
hear
of
me.
those things,
I just like to sit like
and
this.
we achieved even new heights and new greatness. The living Americans today
All right, I want my
have
bad
fought harder,
posture.
paid a higher
All
price
right?
for freedom, and done more to advance the dignity of man.
I'm not a
than any
president. I'm not
people
gonna stand
who ever
here
lived
like
on
this.
earth. For 200 years, we've lived in the future, believing that tomorrow would be better than today, and today would be better than yesterday. I still believe that. I'm not running for the presidency because I believe that I can solve the problems we've discussed tonight. I believe the people of this country can, and together we can begin the
I know
world
IKEA
over
has
again.
some standing
we can
desks.
Meet our destiny, and that destiny to build
I'm gonna
a
roll with
land
this
here
wooden one until it.
that will be
I
for
don't know.
all mankind a shining city.
I mean, I don't know when it would break. It's pretty
I think
solid.
we ought to get at it.
Mr. Anderson, you have the final 3 minutes.
Mr. Moyer, President Carter was not right a few weeks ago when he said that the American people were confronted with only two choices, with only two men, and with only two parties. I think you've seen tonight in this debate that Governor Reagan and I have agreed on exactly one thing. We are both against the reimposition of a peacetime draft. We have disagreed, I believe, on virtually every other
I want a
issue.
table that's like a cutting board.
I respect you for showing tonight, for appearing here. And I thank the League of Women Voters for the opportunity
so I can
that
cook
they have
while
given me.
while
I am running
playing
for
video
president as an independent because I believe our country is in trouble. I believe that all of us are going to have to begin to work together.
I believe we're all
going
to die.
If you think that I am a spoiler, consider these facts. Do you really think that our economy is healthy? Do you really think that 8 million Americans being out of work and that 50% unemployment among the youth of our country are acceptable? Do you really think that our armed forces are really acceptably strong in those areas of conventional capability where they should be? Do you think that our political institutions are working the way they should when literally only half of our citizens vote? I don't think you do think that. And therefore, I think you ought to consider doing something about it and voting for an independent in 1980. You know, a generation
I'm
of
sure,
office
like
seekers has tried to tell the
even
American
nowadays,
people that
like,
they
you
could
know,
get
voting
something
for the
for
Green
nothing.
Party is a wasted vote.
Time, therefore,
You know, it's
delusion
one
and
vote that you
false
could
hopes,
for the other
and the longer
person.
it continues, the
But I think
more
back then,
dangerous
maybe they had a
it
better
becomes.
shot
They've
at
got to
winning. So
stop
like a
drifting.
spoiler could be
What
like
I wish tonight so desperately is that we
whoever
have more
wins
time to talk
or whoever
about
loses,
some of the other
rather,
issues
you know,
that
they're
are so
spoiling
fundamentally
them. But
important.
yeah, it's a weird.
Great historian Henry Steele Commager said
I wouldn't
that
know if I
in
would
their
admit
lust
that,
for
but
victory, neither traditional
he seems like a
party is
kind of
looking
guy
beyond
who's
November.
straight to the
And he
point.
went on to cite 3 issues that their platforms totally ignore.
But there's definitely, like, you know, some third-party folks who, or even just during primaries, who won't admit like what their polling numbers are, because you never know, I guess.
The issue of our natural resources, the right of posterity to inherit the earth, and what kind of earth will it be?
I mean, Jimmy Carter.
The issue of nationalism. The recognition
he was like
says
polling,
that
like when the
major
Democratic primaries
confronting
first
us
started, he
is
was
global
really low, and then he
and
came.
cannot be solved by nationalism here or
He came out of nowhere
elsewhere.
early.
That is
I mean, shit. I think
chauvinist,
Bernie in
that is
2016
parochial,
wasn't like
that is
even close
as
to being,
anachronistic as states' rights was in the days of Jefferson.
you know, wasn't
Davis.
predicted to be one
Those
of the
are
final
some of
two
the great
people.
Issues: atomic warfare.
So I guess,
the use of our natural resources.
but I don't know if that's the
and
same thing as
issue
what
of
he's saying here.
nationalism
But
that I intend to be talking about in the remaining 6 weeks of this campaign. And I dare hope that the American people will be listening and that they will see that an independent government of John Anderson and Patrick Lucy can give us the kind of coalition government that we need in 1980 to begin to solve our problems. Thank you.
Mr. Anderson, we too wish there were more time, and for all the limitations of the form, and there are other forms to try, the chair, for one, would like to see such meetings become a regular and frequent part of every presidential campaign. Mr. Reagan, Mr. Anderson, we thank you for coming, and thanks to our panelists, Carol Loomis, Daniel Greenberg, Charles Cordry, Lee May, Jane Bryant Quinn, and Soma Golden. And thank you in the audience at home for joining us. This first presidential debate of 1980 has been brought to you as a public service by the League of Women Voters Education Fund. I'm Bill Moyers. Good night.
I mean, I was saying, like, when Bernie first announced his campaign, I don't think anyone gave a shit, because he was just some random independent from Vermont, if I remember correctly, but I don't know. All right, that was the first one. So yeah, I mean, going into this, you know, I asked the question of, you know, because we know Ronald Reagan would have a landslide against Carter, and would again in his second term as well. And I wanted to ask, like, what does it, and granted, I know, like, you know, there's the campaign trail, there's, you know, all the other stuff that goes into that. But, you know, like, debates, I think, at this point in the 80s still had some sort of political gain, that they still can influence an election to a degree. So my question was, like, what did Reagan do in these debates that, you know, to the point where he won in a landslide? To win in a landslide, you better be saying a lot of great things Because even like this
Time
house.
to find the children.
Oh my God, why is that? I forgot
Reagan
about that
Connect.
sound clip. What's up? Not, how you doing? Thank you for the 10 bucks. Is that your voice? That's an OG clip right there. God damn it. What was I saying? But yeah, I think Reagan, like, basically, the only thing I took away from this is he was pretty honest about at least what he wanted to do is like taxes, with like, wanting to give it back to the corporations. Because, if they just had a little bit more capital, he said, that would change things. That would help fight inflation. But he did a lot of jokes, and people were laughing, and they weren't supposed to laugh. But he did a lot of jokes, and I put that big air quotes. And a lot of it's just boomer humor, man. And that's my theory. My theory is that he has that boomer charisma that all the boomers like. Where's Carter? Carter declined this interview. Let me look into that. I remember reading about it. I forgot if it was either he didn't want to be on the stage with 3 people, or he didn't want to, or he felt like, he didn't take Anderson seriously, so he felt it was a waste. Where was... The League of Voters have announced a scheduled debate similar to 1976, 3 presidential and 1 vice presidential. No one had much of a problem with this until it was announced that Representative John B. Anderson might be invited to participate along with Carter and Reagan. Carter steadfastly refused to participate with Anderson included, and Reagan refused to debate without him. It took months of negotiations for the League of Women Voters to finally put together at the Baltimore Convention Center. Reagan said, what we said about how Carter's refusal to debate, blah, blah, blah. The League of Voters promised the Reagan campaign that the debate stage would feature an empty chair to represent the missing president. Carter was very upset about the planned chair stunt. The last minute convinced the league to take it out. Right here. Despite the narrow win in the debate, Anderson, who had been as high as 20% in some polls, that's pretty high. 20% for a third party is pretty high. And at the time the debate was over 10%, dropped to about 5% soon after. Although Anderson got back up to winning 6.6% of the vote on the election day. That's a pretty big vote. Most third party votes now get like maybe 2. Probably interpreted as a stunt to hurt his campaign. I mean, I think it hurt his campaign that he just refused to debate which is basically for what? Because he didn't take John B. Anderson seriously? I think that's a bad move on him. Considering also all the other stuff that was happening in the world. Because I know there was where was it? I just saw it. Yeah, there was a Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. There was Iran hostage crisis. That was a big deal. I think that really hurt Carter. So he wasn't at the first one. And there wasn't even a third one, for whatever reason. But so there's only 2, which is lucking out for me because we don't have to sit here and watch as many. We don't have to do 5 hours again. But yeah, I think honestly, I feel like Reagan won this debate just because he just seemed more charismatic, and I think that's what wins you debates, even if you're bullshitting or telling lies. But I will say this is the first debate we've watched where I feel like there was a little bit back and forth more in a different level than what we've seen. In the past, it's been more like, hey, you're wrong about my tax plan. Reagan was trying to do zingers. You know what I mean? Trying to do some Mitt Romney zingers on him. And like I said, I don't know if they really hit for me, but clearly it did for the audience. But all right, let's get into the second one here. This one's an hour and a half, so buckle up. If you have to use the bathroom, go do it now. If you need a drink, or I mean, you can watch it on your phone on the toilet, whatever works for you. This is in Cleveland, everyone's favorite place.
The League of Women Voters is proud to present this presidential debate.
Oh, that purple on blue.
Our moderator is Howard K. Smith.
Thank you, Mrs. Heinerfeld. The League of Women Voters is pleased to welcome to the Cleveland, Ohio Convention Center Music Hall.
Oh, is that the music hall?
Jimmy Carter, the Democratic Party's candidate for re-election to the presidency, and Governor Ronald Reagan of California, the Republican Party's candidate for the presidency. The candidates will debate questions on domestic, economic, foreign policy, and national security issues. The questions are going to be posed
does he have bumblebees
by a
on his
panel of
tie?
distinguished journalists who are here with me. They are Marvin Stone, the editor of the U.S. News and World Report. Harry
U.S.
Ellis,
News and World
national
Report was back
correspondent
then?
of the Christian Science Monitor. William Hilliard,
hold
assistant
Christian
managing
Science?
editor of the re-election to the presidency, and Governor Ronald Reagan, distinguished journalists who are here with me. They are Marvin Stone, the editor of the U.S. News and World Report, Harry Ellis, national correspondent of the Christian Science Monitor, William Hilliard, assistant managing editor of the Portland Oregonian, Barbara Walters, correspondent, ABC News. The ground rules.
Barbara Walters, I forget. She was at one of the other debates.
Each panelist down here will ask a question, the same question, to each of the two candidates. After the two candidates have answered, a panelist will ask follow-up questions to try to.
I love how
answers.
blurry it is. I don't know.
The candidates will
I just
then have
love
an opportunity each to make a rebuttal.
I love it.
That will constitute the first half of the
debate.
Look
how the
blue
blue is overlapping like that.
Half later on. Some other rules,
the noise.
The candidates are not permitted to bring prepared notes to the podium, but are permitted to make notes during the debate. If the candidates exceed the allotted time agreed on, I will reluctantly but certainly interrupt. We ask the convention center audience here to abide by one ground rule. Please do not applaud or express approval or disapproval during the debate. Now, based on a toss of the coin, Governor Reagan will respond to the first question from Marvin Stone.
Governor, I want to know. I wish they would do that live. I want to see it live, like the NFL.
Peace has emerged as a central issue in this campaign, and the give and take in recent weeks. President Carter has been criticized for responding late to aggressive Soviet impulses, for insufficient buildup of our armed forces, and a paralysis in dealing with Afghanistan and Iran. You have been criticized for being all too quick to advocate the use of lots of muscle, military action, to deal with foreign crises. Specifically, what are the differences between the two of you on the uses of American military power?
I don't know what the differences might be because I don't know what Mr. Carter's policies are. I do know what he has said about mine. And I'm only here to tell you that I believe with all my heart that our first priority must be world peace, and that use of force
world peace
is always
by using
and
force.
only a last resort when everything else has failed. And
so we're looking at this, and we're thinking about how many of these folks are still living. Yeah, Carter's 99,
now,
98.
I believe
because last stream
also that this
they were talking about Henry Kissinger, who's also still alive.
Responsibility
somehow.
for preserving the peace, which I believe
like
is a responsibility peculiar to our country, that we cannot shirk our responsibility as the leader of the free world because we're the only one that can do it. And therefore, the burden of maintaining the peace falls on us. And to maintain that peace requires strength.
Right.
America has never gotten in a war because we were too strong. We can get into a war by letting events get out of hand as they have in the last 3.5 years.
Because that's our job.
Under the foreign policies of this administration, of Mr. Carter's, until we're faced each time with a crisis. And good management in preserving the peace requires...
I'm sorry. I know it's not Carter's fault, but just like this, like... I just love the pixelization on his face. It's so...
Is that we control the events.
The TVs don't do him any
favors.
To
intercept.
And I'm sure Reagan will look just like that too if they pan the other way.
But I have seen 4 wars in my lifetime. I'm a father of sons. I have a grandson.
Congrats.
I don't ever want to see another generation of young Americans bleed their lives into sandy beachheads in the Pacific or rice paddies and jungles in Asia or the muddy, bloody battlefields of Europe.
Mr. Stone, do you have a follow-up question for the governor?
Yes, Governor, we've been hearing that the defense buildup that you would associate yourself
He's like, yeah, I don't want to see any more
Americans now contemplated.
in battlefields, but then like we also need a shore force.
Ready to bear this cost. They nevertheless keep asking the following question. How do you reconcile huge increases in military outlays with your promise of substantial tax cuts and of balancing the budget, which in this fiscal year, one that just ended, ran more than $60 billion in the red?
Well, Mr. Stone, I have submitted an economic plan that I've worked out in concert with a number of fine economists in this country, all of whom approve it and believe that over a 5-year projection, this plan can permit the extra spending for needed refurbishing of our defensive posture, that
do you think that actually happens?
For a balanced budget by 1983, if not earlier, and that we can afford.
Do you think any of them actually sit down
that I have proposed in government spending?
Talk about it.
We can afford the tax cuts I have proposed.
With economics,
probably mainly because Mr. Carter's economic policy has built into the next 5 years and on beyond that a tax increase that would be taking $86 billion more next year out of the people's pockets than was taken this year. And my tax cut does not come close to eliminating that $86 billion increase. I'm only reducing the amount of the increase. In other words, what I'm talking about is not putting government back to getting less money than government's been getting, but simply cutting the increase in spending.
The same question now goes to President Carter. President Carter, would you like to have the question repeated?
Yes, President Carter. The question of war and peace, a central issue in this campaign.
Wait.
You've been criticized for responding late to aggressive
Why do you say, Carter, do you need that?
Impulses for an insufficient buildup of our armed forces and a paralysis in dealing with Afghanistan and Iran. Governor Reagan, on the other hand, has been criticized for being all too quick to advocate the use of lots of muscle military action to deal with foreign crises such as I've mentioned. Specifically, what are the differences between the two of you on the uses of American military power?
Mr. Stone, I've had to make thousands of decisions since I've been president, serving in the Oval Office. And with each one of those decisions that affect the future of my country, I have learned in the process. I think I'm a much wiser and more experienced man than I was when I debated 4 years ago against President Ford. I've also learned that there are no simple answers to complicated questions. H.L. Mencken said that for every problem, there's a simple answer. It would be neat and plausible and wrong. The fact is that this nation,
boomers don't like this shit.
Before I became president, had its own military strength.
You don't want no quotes.
Decrease. 7 out of 8 years, the budget
from some
commitments for
no-name
defense
person
went down 37% in all.
They want zingers.
Since I've been in office, we've had a steady, carefully planned, methodical, but very effective increase in our commitment for defense. But what we've done is to use that enormous power and prestige and military strength of the United States to preserve the peace. We've not only kept peace for our own country, but we've been able to extend the benefits of peace to others. In the Middle East, we've worked for a peace treaty between Israel and Egypt successfully and have tied ourselves together with Israel and Egypt in a common defense capability. This is a very good step forward for our nation's security, and we'll continue to do as we've done in the past. I might also add that there are decisions that are made in the Oval Office by every president which are profound in nature. There are always trouble spots in the world, and how those troubled areas are addressed by a president alone in that Oval Office affects our nation directly. The involvement of the United States and also our American interest. That is a basic decision that has to be made so frequently by every president who serves. That's what I've tried to do successfully by keeping our country at peace.
Mr. Stone, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I would like to be a little more specific on the use of military power, and let's talk about one area for a moment. Under what circumstances would you use military forces to deal with, for example, a shutoff of Persian Oil Gulf, if that should occur, or to counter Russian expansion beyond Afghanistan into either Iran or Pakistan? I ask this question in view of charges that we are woefully
But the thing is, like, you can make the argument
sustained,
that why would I admit what I'm going to do
sustained
and give the Russians a
Mr. Stone, in my State of the Union address earlier this year, I pointed out that
give them an idea of what you're thinking.
Stability or security of the Persian Gulf would be a threat to the security of our own country. In the past, we've not had an adequate military presence in that region. Now we have 2 major carrier task forces. We have access to facilities in 5 different areas of that region. And we've made it clear that working with our allies and others, that we are prepared to address any foreseeable eventuality which might interrupt commerce with that crucial area of the world. But in doing this, we have made sure that we address this question peacefully, not injecting American military forces into combat, but letting the strength of our nation be felt in a beneficial way. This, I believe, has assured that our interests will be protected in the Persian Gulf region, as we've done in the Middle East and throughout the world.
Governor Reagan, you have a minute to comment or rebut.
Well, yes, I question the figure about the decline in defense spending under the 2 previous administrations in the preceding 8 years to this administration. I would call to your attention that we were in a war that wound down during those 8 years, which of course made a change in military spending because of turning from war to peace. I also would like to point out that Republican presidents in those years, faced with a Democratic majority in both houses of the Congress, found that their requests for defense budgets were very often cut. Now, Gerald Ford left a 5-year projected plan for a military buildup to restore our defenses, and President Carter's administration reduced that
giving money
by
to the Department of Defense.
38%, cut 60 ships out of the Navy building program that had been proposed, and
no one questions it now besides like a handful of people.
The B-1, delayed the cruise missile, stopped the production line for the Minuteman missile, stopped the Tridents, or delayed the Trident submarine, and now is planning a mobile military
I think Reagan
force
just
that can
really
be delivered
loves
to
like
various spots in the world,
tanks and
which
subs
does make me
and
question his
battleships
assaults on whether I am the one that is quick to look for use of force.
President Carter, you have the last word on this question.
Well, there are various elements of defense. One is to control nuclear weapons, which I hope we'll get to later on, because that's the most important single issue in this campaign. Another one is how to address troubled areas of the world. I think habitually, Governor Reagan has advocated the injection of military forces into troubled areas, when I and my predecessors, both Democrats and Republicans, have advocated resolving those troubles and those difficult areas of the world peacefully, diplomatically, and through negotiation. In addition to that, the buildup of military forces is good for our country because we've got to have military strength in order to preserve the peace. But I'll always remember that the best weapons are the ones that are never fired in combat, and the best soldier is one who never has to lay his life down on the field of battle. Strength is imperative for peace, but the two must go hand in hand.
Thank you, gentlemen. The next question is from Harry Ellis to President Carter.
Mr. President, when you were elected in 1976, the Consumer Price Index stood at 4.8%. It now stands at more than 12%. Perhaps more significantly, the nation's broader underlying inflation rate has gone up from 7 to 9%. Now, a part of that was due to external factors beyond U.S. control.
Isn't the inflation rate
the
now
more than
like
doubling of oil prices
9%
by
too?
OPEC last year. Because the United States remains vulnerable to such external shocks, can inflation, in fact, be controlled? If so, what measures would you pursue in a second term?
It's got to be higher
Again,
than that.
It's important to put
Let me look it up.
the situation into perspective. In 1974, we had a so-called oil shock, wherein the price of OPEC oil was raised to an extraordinary degree. We had an even worse oil shock in 1979. In 1974, we had the worst recession, the deepest and most penetrating recession since the Second World War. The recession that resulted this time was the briefest we've had since the Second World War. In addition, we've brought down inflation. Early this year, the first quarter, we did have
so in 2022 it was like 9%. That's the highest in July.
It averaged about
it is now 5%.
The first quarter of this year.
If you're looking at from a monthly basis.
We had dropped it down to about 13%. The most recent figures, the last 3 months of the third quarter of this year, the inflation rate is 7%. Still too high, but it illustrates very vividly that in addition to providing an enormous number of jobs, 9 million new jobs in the last 3.5 years, that the inflationary threat is still urgent on us.
It's still awful.
I noticed that Governor Reagan recently mentioned the Reagan-Kemp-Roth proposal, which his own running mate, George Bush, described as voodoo economics, and said that
so yeah, 1980, the inflation rate was almost the highest it's been since
not a Democratic publication said,
since the 40s.
That this Reagan-Kemp-Roth proposal, and I quote them, I think, was completely irresponsible.
Probably won't be able to
and
see
would
this.
Result in inflationary pressures which would destroy this nation.
But basically, it goes
so our proposals
up.
are very sound. And
it was super. It was like actually negative 10% in the 30s,
to improve
or in the 20s.
The industrial
then it went up in the
40s,
came down, went up again.
American workers, and at the same time would be
but it's been about the same since the 80s.
So to add 9 million new
jobs, but then it
to
jumped up
control
during
inflation,
COVID.
And to plan for the future with the energy policy now intact as a foundation is our plan for the years ahead.
Mr. Ellis, do you have a follow-up
But still,
question
think about
Mr.
this.
Carter?
How many times do you
Yes,
get
Mr. President,
a pay raise
you have
that
mentioned
equals
the creation of 9 million
same
new
percentage
jobs.
as
At the
inflation?
same time, the unemployment rate still hangs high, as does the inflation rate. Now, I wonder, can you tell us what additional policies you would pursue in a second administration in order to try to bring down that inflation rate?
This is why we job hop. This is why we do it. Yes.
Leadership to tell the American people
the only way you get a raise
they're
anymore.
going to have to sacrifice
a legitimate
to adopt a leaner lifestyle for some time to come.
Yes, we have demanded that the American people sacrifice, and they've done very well. As a matter of fact, we are importing today about 1/3 less oil from overseas than we did just a year ago. We've had a 25% reduction since the first year I was in office. At the same time, as I said earlier, we have added about 9 million net new jobs in that period of time, a record never before achieved. Also, the new energy policy has been predicated on
shit, that's how I got a good raise.
Conservation,
it's job hopping.
Which requires sacrifice.
Technically.
And the other one, increase in production of American
What counts as job hopping?
Going along very well. More coal this year than ever before.
6 months, a year,
more oil and gas wells
2 years
drilled this year than ever before in history. The new economic
I have no numbers in front of me,
program
but I feel like a lot of
which
people
will
my
be
age,
implemented next
like,
year,
you know,
would
late
result in
20s.
tax credits,
I feel like a lot of us
which would
have
let business invest in new
only stay at
tools
places
and
for
new
like
factories to create even more new
3-ish years.
jobs, about 1 million in the next 2 years.
Every
And
6
we
months?
also have planned a youth
I guess I
employment
didn't job
program,
hop then.
which would encompass 600,000 jobs for young people.
I stayed at my one job
This has
for
already
a
passed
year
the
and
House,
7
and has
months.
an excellent prospect to pass the Senate.
Which I feel like
now,
is
the
short,
same question
but
goes to Governor Reagan. Governor Reagan, would you like to have the
maybe it's
question
because both
repeated?
my parents worked at companies for like 25
Governor Reagan,
years.
during the past 4 years, the consumer price index has risen from 4.8% to currently over 12%. And perhaps more significantly, the nation's broader underlying rate of inflation has gone up from 7 to 9%. Now, a part of that has been due to external factors beyond U.S. control, and notably the more than doubling of OPEC oil prices last year, which leads me to ask you whether, since the United States remains vulnerable to such external shocks, can inflation in fact be controlled? If so, specifically, what measures would you pursue?
Mr. Ellis,
Who
I think
called
this
them? You
idea
see they looked
that
up
has
the
been
phone?
spawned here in our country that inflation somehow came upon us like a plague and therefore it's uncontrollable and no one can do anything about it is entirely spurious, and it's dangerous to say this to the people. When Mr. Carter became president, inflation was 4.8%, as you said. It had been cut in two by President Gerald Ford. It is now running at 12.7%. President Carter also has spoken of the new jobs created. Well, we always, with the normal growth in our country and increase in population, increase the number of jobs. But that can't hide the fact that there are 8 million men and women out of work in America today, and 2 million of those lost their jobs in just the last few months. Mr. Carter had also promised that he would not use unemployment as a tool to fight against inflation. And yet his 1980 economic message stated that we would reduce productivity and gross national product and increase unemployment in order to get a handle on inflation, because in January, at the beginning of the year, it was more than 18%. Since then, he has blamed to the people for inflation OPEC. He's blamed the Federal Reserve System. He has blamed the lack of productivity of the American people. He has then accused the people of living too well, and that we must share in scarcity, we must sacrifice and get used to doing with less. We don't have inflation because the people are living too well. We have inflation because the government is living too well. And the last statement, just a few days ago, was a speech to the effect that we have inflation because government revenues have not kept pace with government spending. I see my time is running out here. I'll have to get this down very fast. Yes, you can lick inflation by increasing productivity and by decreasing the cost of government to the place that we have balanced budgets and are no longer grinding out printing press money, flooding the market with it because the government is spending more than it takes in. And my economic plan calls for that. The president's economic plan calls for increasing the taxes to the point that we finally take so much money away from the people that we can balance the budget in that way. But we will have a very poor nation and a very unsound economy if we follow that path.
Follow up, Mr. Ellis?
Yes, you have centered on cutting government spending in what you have just said about your own policies. You have also said that you would increase defense spending. Specifically, where would you cut government spending if you were to increase defense spending and also cut taxes so that presumably federal revenues would shrink?
Well, most people, when they think about cutting government spending, they think in terms of eliminating necessary programs or wiping out some service that government is supposed to perform. I believe that there is enough extravagance and fat in government. As a matter of fact, one of the secretaries of HEW under Mr. Carter testified that he thought there was $7 billion worth of fraud and waste in welfare and in the medical programs associated with it. We've had the General Accounting Office estimate that there is probably tens of billions of dollars that is lost in fraud alone, and they have added that waste adds even more to that. We have a program for a gradual reduction of government spending based on these theories, and I have a task force now that has been working on where those cuts could be made. I'm confident that it can be done and that it will reduce inflation because I did it in California, and inflation went down below the national average in California when we returned money to the people and reduced government spending.
I think this is where he gets some voters too. Keeps saying giving money to the people.
Governor Reagan's proposal, the Reagan
and the only time he's really been specific about it is with like giving money to corporations and stuff, reducing taxes.
Has been presented to the American public.
That's about it. He hasn't really been too specific.
By at least $130 billion.
But he's saying the right words,
under this ridiculous proposal. I noticed that his task force is working for his future plans. Had some of their ideas revealed in the Wall Street Journal this week. One of those ideas was to repeal the minimum wage. And several times this year, Governor Reagan has said that the major cause of unemployment is the minimum wage. This is a heartless kind of approach to the working families of our country.
He wants to get rid of minimum wage?
Many Republican
I feel like it's kind of a hot take in the 80s.
I think it's been accentuated under Governor Reagan. In California, I'm surprised Governor Reagan brought this up, he had the 3 largest tax increases in the history of that state under his administration. He more than doubled state spending while he was governor, 122% increase, and had between a 20 and 30% increase in the number of employees.
Sorry to interrupt,
in California.
Carter.
Thank you, sir.
It's Governor Reagan has the last word on this question.
Yes. The figures that the president has just used about California is a distortion of the situation there. Because while I was governor of California,
once again,
our spending in California
they said this about some vague numbers.
Than the spending
They're lying.
in Georgia.
I'm not lying.
While Mr. Carter was governor of Georgia in the same 4 years. The size of government increased only 1/6 in California of what it increased in proportion to population in Georgia. And the idea that my tax cut proposal is inflationary, I would like to ask the president, why is it inflationary to let the people keep more of their money and spend it the way they'd like? And it isn't inflationary to let him take that money and spend it the way he wants.
I wish that question need not be rhetorical, but it must be because we run out of time on that. Now, the third question to Governor Reagan from William Hilliard.
Is this starting to turn to more
Reagan,
like I said, like
of our cities has been hastened
the first
by the
couple debates, weren't
crime,
as like spicy. It's starting to get a little spicy.
Fall in the quality of public education.
There's some a little bit back and forth now.
In a rich nation, and a decline in the services to the public. The signs seem to point toward a deterioration that could lead to the establishment of a permanent underclass in the cities. What specifically would you do in the next 4 years to reverse this trend?
I have been talking to a number of congressmen who have much the same idea that I have, and that is that in the inner city areas, that in cooperation with local government and with national government, and using tax incentives and with cooperation with the private sector, that we have development zones. Let the local entity, the city, declare this particular area based on the standards of the percentage of people on welfare, unemployed, and so forth in that area. And then through tax incentives, induce the creation of businesses providing jobs and so forth in those areas. The elements of government through these tax incentives. For example, a business that would not have for a period of time an increase in the property tax reflecting its development of the unused property that it was making. Wouldn't be any loss to the city because the city isn't getting any tax from that now. And there would simply be a delay. And on the other hand, many of the people that would then be given jobs are presently wards of the government, and it wouldn't hurt to give them a tax incentive because that wouldn't be costing government anything either. I think there are things to do in this regard. I stood in the South Bronx on the exact spot that President Carter stood on in 1977. You have to see it to believe it. It looks like a bombed out city. Great gaunt skeletons of buildings, windows smashed out, painted on one of them, unkept promises, on another despair. And this was the spot at which President Carter had promised
looked like the Warriors
that he was
out
going
there.
To bring in a vast program to rebuild this department. There are
Wasn't the Warriors, did that movie come out in like 1979?
Just bulldozed down flat. And nothing has been done, and they are now charging to take tourists through there to see this terrible desolation. I talked to a man just briefly there who asked me one simple question. Do I have reason to hope that I can someday take care of my family again? Nothing has been done.
Follow up, Mr. Hilliard?
Yes, Governor Reagan. Blacks and other non-whites are increasing in numbers in our cities. Many of them feel that they are facing a hostility from whites that prevents them from joining the economic mainstream of our society. There is racial confrontation in the schools, on jobs, and in housing as non-whites seek to reap the benefits of a free society. What do you think is the nation's future as a multiracial society?
I believe in it. I am eternally optimistic, and I happen to believe that we've made great progress from the days when I was young and when this country didn't even know it had a racial problem. I know those things can grow out of despair in an inner city, when there's hopelessness at home, lack of work, and so forth. But I believe that all of us together, and I believe the presidency is what Teddy Roosevelt said it was. It's a bully pulpit. And I think that something can be done from there, because the goal for all of us should be that one day things will be done neither because of nor in spite of any of the differences between us, ethnic differences or racial differences, whatever they may be, that we will have total equal opportunity for all people. And I would do everything I could in my power.
The idea of freedom in America is always like
Mr. Hilliard, would you repeat
equal
your question for President
opportunity.
Carter?
It's always about opportunity.
President Carter,
the opportunity to maybe get rich.
Of our cities has been hastened by
opportunity
the continual
to get
rise in crime,
a decent
strained
job.
race relations, the fall in the quality of public education,
fucking
persistence
just
of
peak
abnormal poverty in a rich nation,
capitalism, dude.
and a decline in services to the public. The signs seem to point toward a deterioration that could lead to the establishment of a permanent underclass in the cities. What specifically would you do in the next 4 years to reverse this trend?
Thank you, Mr. Hilliard. When I was campaigning in 1976, everywhere I went, the mayors and local officials were in despair about the rapidly deteriorating central cities of our nation. We initiated a very fine urban renewal program, working with the mayors, the governors, and other interested officials. This has been a very successful effort. That's one of the main reasons that we've had such an increase in the number of people employed. Of the 9 million people put to work in new jobs since I've been in office, 1.3 million of those has been among black Americans and another million among those who speak Spanish. We're now planning to continue the revitalization program with increased commitments of rapid transit, mass transit. Under the windfall profits tax, we expect to spend about $43 billion in the next 10 years.
Damn, we could have got mass transit in the 70s, and we're like, nope, more highways.
Pursuing the housing programs. We've had a 73% increase in the allotment of federal funds for improved education. These are the kinds of efforts worked on a joint basis with community leaders, particularly in the minority areas of essential cities that have been deteriorating so rapidly in the past. It's very important to us that this be done with the full involvement of minority citizens. I've brought into the top levels of government, into the White House, into administrative offices of the executive branch, into the judicial system, highly qualified black and Spanish citizens and women who in the past had been excluded. I noticed that Governor Reagan said that when he was a younger man, that there was no knowledge of a racial problem in this country. Those who suffered from discrimination because of race or sex certainly knew we had a racial problem. We have gone a long way toward correcting these problems, but we still have a long way to go.
That was a good ending to that answer.
Yes, President Carter, I would like to repeat the same follow-up to you. Blacks and other non-whites are increasing in numbers in our cities. Many of them feel that they are facing a hostility from whites that prevents them from joining the economic mainstream of our society. There is racial confrontation in the schools, on jobs, and in housing.
That was his first got him. Yeah, I feel like this is only best answer or his best response to something.
What is your
so
assessment of the nation's
Carter's not having a good debate
in multiracial society?
Ours is a nation of
he doesn't seem confident either, you know what I mean?
A nation of immigrants. Almost all of our citizens came here from other lands.
Seems very stiff.
And now have hopes, which are being realized, for a better life, preserving their ethnic commitments, their family structures, their religious beliefs, preserving their relationships with their relatives in foreign countries, but still forming themselves together in a very coherent society, which gives our nation its strength. In the past, those minority groups have often been excluded from participation in the affairs of government. Since I've been president, I've appointed, for instance, more than twice as many black federal judges as all previous presidents in the history of this country. I've done the same thing in the appointment of women and also Spanish-speaking Americans, to involve them in administration of government and a feeling that they belong to the societal structure that makes decisions in the judiciary and in the executive branch is a very important commitment, which I am trying to realize and will continue to do so in the future.
Governor Reagan, you have a minute for rebuttal.
Yes. The president talks of government programs, and they have their place.
Reagan has been on the offensive
Governor,
the entire time.
When I was at that end of the line and receiving some of these grants for government programs, I saw that so many of them were dead end. They were public employment for these people who really want to get out into the private job market where there are jobs with a future. Now, the president spoke a moment ago about that I was against the minimum wage. I wish he could have been with me when I sat with a group of teenagers who were black and who were telling me about their unemployment problems, and that it was the minimum wage that had done away with the jobs that they once could get. And indeed, every time it is increased, you will find that there is an increase in minority unemployment among young people.
I doubt that shit.
Therefore, I have been
in
favor of a separate minimum for them. With regard to the great progress that has been made with this government spending, the rate of black unemployment in Detroit, Michigan is 56%.
I have a black friend, don't worry. He told me.
President Carter, you have the last word on
this. He based his entire opinion off of
well, it's obvious that we
who
still
I
have a
don't
long
believe
way
is
to
real.
go in fully incorporating the
people.
minority groups into the mainstream of American life.
Right.
We have made good progress. And there's no doubt in my mind that the commitment to unemployment compensation, the minimum wage, welfare, national health insurance, those kinds of commitments that have typified the Democratic Party since ancient history in this country's political life are a very important element of the future. In all those elements, Governor Reagan has repeatedly spoken out against them, which to me shows a very great insensitivity to giving deprived families a better chance in life. This, to me, is a very important difference between him and me in this election, and I believe the American people will judge accordingly.
Well,
there is no doubt in my mind that in the downtown central cities, with the new commitment on an energy policy, with a chance to revitalize homes and to make them more fuel efficient, with a chance for a synthetic fuels program, solar power, this will give us an additional opportunity for jobs which will pay rich dividends.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now for the fourth question.
Yeah, Carter put
President
solar
Carter
panels
from
on the
Barbara
White House,
Walters.
and then Reagan came in and took them down.
Mr. President, the eyes of the country tonight are on the hostages in Iran. I realize this is a sensitive area, but the question of how we respond to acts of terrorism goes beyond this current crisis. Other countries have policies that
I think this really
hurt
Carter
Israel,
too.
For example,
like I said,
considers hostages like soldiers
this
and will
hostage
not negotiate
situation,
with terrorists.
I think it's really hard
For the
to
future, Mr. President, the country
win
has
any
the right
sort
to
of
know
international
do you have a policy for dealing with
conversation
wherever it might happen,
in the debates
and what have we learned from this experience in
people
Iran
currently
that
hostage.
might cause us to do things differently
Yeah,
if this was something
this is very
similar
young Barbara
happens again?
Walters. Yeah.
Barbara, one of the blights on this world is the threat and the activities of terrorists. At one of the recent economic summit conferences between myself and the other leaders of the Western world, we committed ourselves to take strong action against terrorism. Airplane hijacking was one of the elements of that commitment. There is no doubt that we have
airplane hijacking is going to get a lot worse
in recent months. Additional acts of violence
Carter.
against Jews in France, and of course against those who live in Israel by the PLO and other terrorist organizations. Ultimately, the most serious terrorist threat is if one of those radical nations who believe in terrorism as a policy should have atomic weapons. Both I and all my predecessors have had a deep commitment to controlling
When did Israel
the proliferation of nuclear weapons
get their nuke?
In countries like Libya
I know
or
they have
Iraq.
one. At least one.
We have even alienated some of our closest trade partners because we have insisted upon the control of the spread of nuclear weapons to those potentially terrorist countries. When Governor Reagan has been asked about that, he makes a very disturbing comment that non-proliferation or the control of the spread of nuclear weapons is none of our business. And when he was asked specifically
you've come to the right
about
place,
Iraq,
Vitter.
he said there's nothing we can do about it. This ultimate terrorist
This is just the
threat
start of our
is the most
debate
fearsome
journey.
of all, and it's part of a pattern
all through
where our
June
country
and
must
July.
stand
That is the
firm
goal, to get
control
through all the
terrorism of
presidential
all
debates.
kinds.
Ms. Walters, a follow-up?
Cat just got food.
While we are discussing policy, had Iran not taken American hostages, I assume that in order to preserve our neutrality, we would have stopped the flow of spare parts and vital war materials once war broke out between Iraq and Iran. Now we're offering to lift the ban on such goods if they let our people come home. Doesn't this reward terrorism, compromise our neutrality, and possibly antagonize nations now friendly to us in the Middle East?
We will maintain our position of neutrality in the Iran and Iraq war. We have no plans to sell additional material or goods to Iran that might be of a warlike nature. When I made my decision to stop all trade with Iran as a result of the taking of our hostages, I announced then and have consistently maintained since then that if the hostages are released safely, that we would make delivery on those items which Iran owns, which they have bought and paid for. Also, that the frozen Iranian assets would be released. That's been a consistent policy, one I intend to carry out.
Would you repeat the question now for Governor Reagan, please, Ms. Walters?
Yes. Governor, the eyes of the country tonight remain on the hostages in Iran, but the question of how we respond to acts of terrorism goes beyond this current crisis. There are other countries that have policies that determine how they will respond. Israel, for example, considers hostages like soldiers and will not negotiate with terrorists. For the future, the country has the right to know, do you have a policy for dealing with terrorism wherever it might happen? And what have we learned from this experience in Iran that might cause us to do things differently if this or something similar should happen again?
Barbara, you've asked that question twice. I think you ought to have at least one answer to it.
Oh my God. Stop.
I have been accused lately of having a secret plan
okay,
with
I'll give
regard
him
to the
that
hostages. Now, this comes from
Just
an
that
answer
one.
that I've made at least 50 times during this campaign to the press.
That's it. It's his charisma.
Which is that the question
and his
would
boomer
be,
humor,
have you
I'm
any
telling
ideas of what you would do if you were there?
That's the secret
And I
sauce.
said, well, yes. And I think that anyone that's seeking this position, as well as other people probably, have thought to themselves, what about this? What about that?
These Hollywood,
are just
baby.
ideas of what I would think of if I were in that position and had access to the information in which
It makes
I would
me
know
think
all the
if
options that
Bernie
were open
was
to
a
me.
little bit more, had more
I have
Zoomer
never
energy,
answered the question,
he might have won.
However, second, the one that says, well, tell me, what are some of those
Razzle-dazzle.
ideas? First of all, I would be fearful that I might say something that was presently underway or in negotiations and thus expose it and endanger the hostages. And sometimes I think some of my ideas might involve quiet diplomacy where you don't say in advance or say to anyone what it is you're thinking of doing. Your question is difficult to answer.
We're sending in
because
SEAL Team 6.
in the situation right now, no one wants to say anything that would inadvertently delay in any way the return of those hostages if there is a chance of their coming home soon, or that might cause them harm. What I do think should be done, once they are safely here with their families and that tragedy is over, and we've endured this humiliation for just lacking 1 week of a year now, then I think it is time for us to have a complete investigation.
Damn, it was that long? Almost a year?
As to the
Over a year?
diplomatic efforts that were
Yeah,
made
that's
in the
a big
beginning,
L.
why they have been there so long, and when they come home, what did we have to do in order to bring
Difference
that
is one of
about?
them acts like they know
What
there's
arrangements were made?
people watching them on
And
TV.
I would
and the
suggest
other
that
acts like they don't even know where the
should
cameras
hold
are
such
on.
an investigation.
It's
In the
just crazy
meantime,
because I don't
I'm
think
going to
Carter was
continue
that
praying that they'll come
bad
home.
in his
Follow-up
other debates
question?
against
I would like to say that
Ford.
neither candidate answered specifically the question of a specific policy for dealing
He wasn't
with
amazing,
terrorism,
you
but
know,
I will ask Governor Reagan a
blow the doors off,
different
but like he
follow-up
wasn't too
question.
bad in that.
You've had suggested that
He
there would
just
be
seems
no
so
Iranian crisis had he
stiff
been
and, like,
president, because
not
we would have given
energized.
firmer support to the Shah. But Iran is a
Doesn't
country
come
of
across
37 million
confident.
people who were resisting a government they regarded as dictatorial. My question is not whether the Shah's regime was preferable to the Ayatollahs, but
It's like
whether
playing,
the United States
prevent
has the
defense
power or
in-
the
in
right
football,
to try to
you know,
determine
it's
what
just-
form of government any country will
I think
have. And
he's
do we
just playing
back
like
unpopular regimes
hoping they just don't
whose
score.
major merit is that they are friendly
That's
to
how
the
Carter
United
is
States?
playing this right now.
The degree of unpopularity of a regime, when the choice is total authoritarianism, totalitarianism, I should say, in the alternative government, makes one wonder whether you are being helpful to the people. And we've been guilty of that. Because someone didn't meet exactly our standards of human rights, even though they were an ally of ours, instead of trying patiently to persuade them to
Barbara
change their
Wawa.
ways, we have, in a number of instances, aided a revolutionary overthrow which results in complete totalitarianism instead for those people. And I think that this is a kind of a hypocritical policy when at the same time we're maintaining a détente with the one nation in the world where there are no human rights at all, the Soviet Union. Now, there was a second phase
He wants
in the
more,
Iranian
dude.
affair
He wants to
in
use
which we
those
had something to do with
big
that.
tanks
And
and
that
the
was we had
submarines.
adequate warning that there was a threat to our embassy, and we could have done what other embassies did, either strengthen our security there or remove our personnel before the kidnap and the takeover took place.
Governor, I'm sorry, I must interrupt.
Yeah, Carter's
President Carter, you
getting
have a
crushed
minute
right
for
now.
rebuttal.
I didn't hear any comment from Governor Reagan about what he would do to stop or to reduce terrorism in the future. What the Western allies
Okay,
did decide
I'll
to
give
do
you
is
that
to
one.
stop all air flights, commercial air flights to any nation involved in terrorism or the hijacking of airplanes or the harboring of hijackers. Secondly, we all committed ourselves, as have all my predecessors in the Oval Office, not to permit the spread of nuclear weapons to a terrorist nation or to any other nation that does not presently
Except we'll
have
give
those weapons
nukes to
or
Israel
capabilities for explosives.
eventually. I don't know if that's
Third,
happened
not to
yet,
make any
but
sales of material or weapons
we define
to
who is a
nation
terrorist
which is
nation,
involved
who
in
is
terrorist activities. And lastly, not to deal
freedom
with the PLO
fighters versus terrorists.
until and unless the PLO recognizes Israel's right to exist and recognizes UN Resolution 242 as a basis for Middle East peace. These are a few of the things to which our nation is committed, and we will continue with these commitments.
Governor Reagan, you have the last word on that question.
Yes, I have no quarrel whatsoever with the things that have been done because I believe it is high time that the civilized countries of the world made it plain that there is no room worldwide for terrorism. There will be no negotiation with terrorists of any kind. And while I have a last word here, I would like to correct a misstatement of fact by the president.
Yeah, Ronald Reagan.
I have never made the statement that he suggested about nuclear proliferation.
The start of the end.
And nuclear proliferation or the trying to halt it would be a major part of a foreign policy of mine.
That's our boy.
Thank you, gentlemen. That is the first half of the debate. Now the rules for the second half.
Wait.
Quite simple. They're only complicated when I explain them.
There's a halftime. That was the first half. You ready for the second? Dude, what if they had a halftime like actual like sports? They're like they both go into a briefing room and they come back. That'd be kind of cool. We're not doing an intermission, but
in second half, the panelists with me will have no follow-up questions. Instead, after the panelists have asked a question, the candidates have answered. Each of the candidates
there's a big
will
crowd
have
here this time.
opportunities to
We
follow
got some
up,
folks.
to question, to rebut, or just to comment on his opponent's statement. Governor Reagan will respond in this section to the first question from Marvin Stone.
Governor Reagan, arms control. The president said it was the single most important issue. Both of you have expressed the desire to end the nuclear arms race with Russia, but by methods that are vastly different. You suggest that we scrap the SALT II treaty already negotiated and intensify the buildup of American power to induce the Soviets to sign a new treaty, one more favorable to us.
We'll make more to force them to
President
sign
Carter, on the
to
other
not
hand,
make more.
Says he will again try to convince a reluctant Congress to ratify the present treaty on the grounds it's the best we can hope to get. Now, both of you cannot be right. Will you tell us why you think you are?
Yes, I think I'm right because I believe that we must have a consistent foreign policy, a strong America, and a strong economy. And then, as we build up our national security to restore our margin of safety, we at the same time try to restrain the Soviet buildup, which has been going forward at a rapid pace and for quite some time.
Right.
The SALT II treaty was the result of negotiations that Mr. Carter's team entered into after he had asked the Soviet Union for a discussion of actual reduction of nuclear strategic weapons. And his emissary, I think, came home in 12 hours with having heard a very definite niet. But taking that one no from the Soviet Union, we then went back into negotiations on their terms because Mr. Carter had canceled the B-1 bomber, delayed the MX, delayed the Trident submarine, delayed the cruise missile, shut down the missile
he loves the military tech.
Missile production
he would have
line,
loved the military channel.
And whatever other things that might have been done.
On DirecTV,
the Soviet
oh my
Union
God.
sat at the table knowing that we had gone forward with unilateral concessions without any reciprocation from them whatsoever. Now, I have not blocked the SALT II treaty as Mr. Carter and Mr. Mondale suggest that I have. It has been blocked by a Senate in which there is a Democratic majority. Indeed, the Senate Armed Services Committee voted 10-0 with 7 abstentions against the SALT II treaty and declared that it was not in the national security interests of the United States, besides which it is illegal, because the law of the land passed by Congress says we cannot accept a treaty in which we are not equal. And we're not equal in this treaty for one reason alone. Our B-52 bombers are considered to be strategic weapons. Their backfire bombers are not.
Governor, I have to interrupt you at that point.
He's such a nerd.
The same question now to President Carter.
Yes, President Carter, both of you have expressed the desire to end the nuclear arms race with Russia, but through vastly different methods.
Dude,
the governor
Reagan could have been alive for World of
SALT II
Tanks, and
treaty,
he would have loved that
which
shit.
Negotiated
He would
in
love
Vienna,
that game.
Signed in Vienna, intensify the buildup of American power to induce the Soviets to sign a new treaty, one more favorable to us. You, on the other hand, say you will again try to convince a reluctant Congress to ratify the present treaty on the grounds it is the best we can hope to get from the Russians. You cannot both be right. will you tell us why you think you are?
Why that makes me
Yes,
laugh.
I'll be glad to.
You cannot both be right.
Inflation, unemployment, the cities, all very important issues, but they pale into insignificance in the life and duties of a president when compared with the control of nuclear weapons. Every president who has served in the Oval Office since Harry Truman has been dedicated to the proposition of controlling nuclear weapons, to negotiate with the Soviet Union, balanced, controlled, observable, and then reducing levels of atomic weaponry. There is a disturbing pattern in the attitude of Governor Reagan. He has never supported any of those arms control agreements. The limited test ban, SALT I.
Good luck, Ethan. On that.
Nor the
BRB, I'm negotiating
anti-ballistic
explosives for a couple
treaty,
large batteries.
nor the Vladivostok
Please
treaty
read that aloud on
negotiated
stream.
with
Thank you.
the Soviet Union by
Obviously in
President
Rust.
Ford, and now he wants to throw into the wastebasket
Ethan, I think I'll
treaty to
play a
control
little bit
nuclear
after
weapons on a
after
balanced
this.
and equal basis between ourselves and the Soviet Union, negotiated over a 7-year period by myself and my 2 Republican predecessors. The Senate has not voted yet on the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. There have been preliminary skirmishings in the committees of the Senate, but the treaty has never come to the floor of the Senate for either a debate or a vote. It's understandable that a senator in the preliminary debates can make an irresponsible statement or maybe an ill-advised statement. You've got 99 other senators to correct that mistake, if it is a mistake. But when a man who hopes to be president says, take this treaty, discard it, do not vote, do not debate, do not explore the issues, do not finally capitalize on this long negotiation, that is a very dangerous and disturbing thing.
Governor Reagan, you have an opportunity to rebut that.
Yes, I'd like to respond very much. First of all, the Soviet Union, if I have been critical of some of the previous agreements, it's because we've been out-negotiated for quite a long time. And they have managed, in spite of all of our attempts at arms limitation, to go forward with the biggest military buildup in the history of man. Now, to suggest that because 2 Republican presidents tried to pass the SALT treaty, that puts them on its side, I would like to say that President Ford, who was within 90% of a treaty that we could be in agreement with when he left office, is emphatically against this SALT treaty. I would like to point out also that senators like Henry Jackson and Hollings of South Carolina, they are taking the lead in the fight against this particular treaty. I am not talking of scrapping. I am talking of taking the treaty back and going back into negotiations, and I would say to the Soviet Union, we will sit and negotiate with you as long as it takes to have not only legitimate arms limitation, but to have a reduction of these nuclear weapons to the point that neither one of us represents a threat to the other. That is hardly throwing away a treaty and being opposed to arms limitation.
President Carter?
Yes. Governor Reagan is making some very misleading and disturbing statements. He not only advocates the scrapping of his treaty, and I don't know that these men that he quotes are against the treaty in its final form, but he also advocates the possibility, he said it's been a missing element, of playing a trump card against the Soviet Union of a nuclear arms race and insisting upon nuclear superiority by our own nation as a predication for negotiation in the future with the Soviet Union. If President Brezhnev said, we will scrap this treaty, negotiated under 3 American presidents over a 7-year period of time, we insist upon nuclear superiority as a basis for future negotiations, and we believe that the launching of a nuclear arms race is a good basis for future negotiations, it's obvious that I, as president, and all Americans would reject such a proposition. This would mean the resumption of a very dangerous nuclear arms race. It would be very disturbing to American people. It would change the basic tone and commitment that our nation has experienced ever since the Second World War, with all presidents, Democratic and Republican, and would also be very disturbing to our allies, all of whom support this nuclear arms treaty. In addition to that, the adversarial relationship between ourselves and the Soviet Union would undoubtedly deteriorate very rapidly. This attitude is extremely dangerous and belligerent in its tone, although it's said with a quiet voice.
Governor Reagan?
Okay, that was good.
The president is supposed to be replying to me, but sometimes I have a hard time in connecting what he's saying with what I have said or what my positions are. Sometimes think it's like the witch doctor that gets mad when a good doctor comes along with a cure that'll work.
There it is again, the boomer humor,
point I have made already, Mr. President, with regard to negotiating.
God.
It does not call for nuclear superiority on the part of the United States. It calls for a mutual reduction of these weapons, as I say, to the point that neither of us can represent a threat to the other. And to suggest that the SALT II treaty that your negotiators negotiated was just a continuation and based on all of the preceding efforts by two previous presidents is just not true. It was a new negotiation because, as I say, President Ford was within about 10% of having a solution that could be acceptable. And I think our allies would be very happy to go along with a fair and verifiable SALT agreement.
President Carter, you have the last word on this question.
David, letting him go
I think
back
to close
and
out
forth.
this discussion, it would be better to put into perspective what we're talking about. I had a discussion with my daughter Amy the other day before I came here to ask her what the most important issue was. She said she thought nuclear weaponry. And the control of nuclear arms.
God, so Reagan has 3 black teens
force.
that he talks to make decisions.
Some of these weapons have 10 megatons
Carter's talking
of
to his daughter to make
if you
decisions
put
for
50
their
tons
debates.
of TNT in each one of railroad cars, you would have a
Also, I
carload
doubt
of
that,
TNT, a trainload of TNT stretching across this nation. That's one major war explosion in a warhead. We have thousands, equivalent of megaton or million tons of TNT warheads.
Yeah, trying to build
the control of these weapons.
I talk to the kids.
Is the single major responsibility of a president, and to cast down this commitment of all presidents because of some slight technicalities that can be corrected is a very dangerous approach.
We have to go to another question now from Harry Ellis to President Carter.
Mr. President, as you have said, Americans, through conservation, are importing much less oil today than we were even a year ago.
I've never heard of Christian
US
Science Monitor.
dependence
They must
on
not exist
Arab
anymore.
oil
Let me look
as
it
a
up.
percentage of total imports is today much higher than it was at the time of the 1973 Arab oil embargo. And for some time to come, the loss of substantial amounts of Arab oil could plunge the U.S. into depression. Now, this means that a bridge must be built out of this dependence. Can the United States develop synthetic fuels and other alternative energy sources without damage to the environment? And will this process mean steadily higher fuel bills for American families?
I don't think there's any doubt that in the future, the cost of oil is going to go up. What I've had as a basic commitment since I've been
Ethan, you should run for president. You know how to make a good,
is to reduce
make
our
a good
dependence
deal.
on foreign oil. It can only be done in two ways.
You could have got a better
One,
SALT
to
Act,
conserve
maybe.
energy, to stop the waste of energy. And
Hell yeah,
secondly,
though.
to
I
produce
don't know if you
more
heard my
American
message, Ethan,
energy.
but I said
We've been very successful
I'll play a
in
little
both
bit of
cases.
Rust after.
We've now reduced the
After
importing
this,
of foreign
might
oil
only be
in
like
the
an
last
hour,
year alone
or so, but
by 1/3.
At least
we
get some
imported
ore.
today 2 million barrels of oil less than we did the same day just a year ago.
It helps that the caffeine's kicking
This
in.
commitment has been opening up a very bright
Out of the
vista for our
deal.
nation in the future. Because with the windfall profits tax as a base, we now have an opportunity to use American technology and American ability and American natural resources to expand rapidly the production of synthetic fuels, yes. To expand rapidly the production of solar energy, yes. And also to produce the conventional kinds of American energy. We will drill more oil and gas wells this year than any year in history. We will produce more coal this year than any year in history. We are exporting more coal
Carter,
this
you were
year
supposed to be
than
the
any year in history.
environmentalist.
And we have an opportunity now with improved transportation
It's not his
systems,
fault.
improved
All
loading
the oil
facilities in
companies
our
were
ports,
lying in the
to
70s.
see a
so.
very good opportunity on the world international market to replace OPEC oil with American coal as a basic energy source. This exciting future will not only give us more energy security, but will also open up vast opportunities for Americans to live a better life and to have millions of new jobs associated with this new and very dynamic industry.
And yet, U.S. reliance on Arab oil as a percentage of total imports
was that a coincidence
is much
that
higher
cut
today
there?
than it was during the 1973
was there a
Arab
commercial?
oil embargo. And the substantial loss of Arab oil could plunge the United States into depression. The question is whether the development of alternative energy sources in order to reduce this dependence can be done without damaging the environment, and will it mean for American families steadily higher fuel bills?
I'm not so sure that it means steadily higher fuel costs, but I do believe that this nation has been portrayed for too long a time to the people as being energy poor when it is energy rich. The coal that the president mentioned, yes, we have it, and yet 1/8 of our total coal resources is not being utilized at all
the national forests,
right now.
you know, national
the mines
parks.
are closed down. There are 22,000 miners out of work. Most of this is due to regulations which either interfere with the mining of it or prevent the burning of it. With our modern technology, yes, we can burn our coal within the limits of the Clean Air Act. I think as technology improves, we'll be able to do even better with that.
A great
the other thing
piece
is
of legislation.
that we have only leased out and begun to explore 2% of our outer continental shelf for oil, where it is believed by everyone familiar with that fuel and that source of energy that there are vast supplies yet to be found. Our government has, in the last year or so,
drilling in the ocean is
taken
safe
out of
for everybody involved,
use,
including the
millions
animals.
of acres of public lands that once were, while they were public lands, subject to multiple use exploration for minerals and so forth. It is believed that probably 70% of the potential oil in the United States is probably hidden in those lands, and no one is allowed to even go and explore to find out if it is there. This is particularly true of the recent efforts to shut down part of
You
Alaska.
just quoted Teddy Roosevelt earlier. He's the one who freaking made half.
Nuclear power. There were 36 power plants planned in this country. And let me add the word safety. It must be done with the utmost of safety. But 32 of those have given up and canceled their plans to build. And again, because government regulations and permits and so forth make it take more than twice as long to build a nuclear plant in the United States as it does to build one in Japan or in Western Europe.
We should be allowed to build wherever we
have the
want.
sources here. We are energy rich. And coal is one of the great potentials we have.
President
Clean
Carter,
coal.
your comment?
Yes, sir.
Remember when we found out that
myself,
Trump wasn't
we
the
have
first person to say clean coal?
This year, the
Yeah.
opportunity
Frickin'
which
Ford
we
was
realized
talking about clean
to
coal.
produce 800 million tons of coal, an unequaled record in the history of our country. Governor Reagan says that this is not a good achievement, and he blames restraints on coal production on regulations that affect the life and the health and safety of miners, and also regulations that protect the purity of our air and the quality of our water and our land. We cannot cast aside those regulations. We have a chance in the next 15 years, insisting upon the health and safety of workers in the mines, and also preserving the same high air and water pollution standards to triple the amount of coal we produce. Governor Reagan's approach to our energy policy, which has already proven its effectiveness, is to repeal or to change substantially the windfall profits tax, to return a major portion of $227 billion back to the oil companies, to do away with the Department of Energy, to short-circuit our synthetic fuels program, to put a minimal emphasis on solar power, to emphasize strongly nuclear power plants as a major source of energy in the future. He wants to put all our eggs in one basket and give that basket to the major oil companies.
Governor Reagan.
Based.
That is a misstatement, of course, of my position.
Carter was right.
I just happen to believe that free enterprise can do a better job of producing the things that people need than government can. The Department of Energy has a multi-billion-dollar
People
budget
still believe
in
that
excess
shit.
of $10
So
billion.
stupid.
It hasn't produced a quart of oil or a lump of coal or anything else in the line of energy.
Yeah, we gotta trust
And
the corporations
for
that are only looking
Mr.
for
Carter
profit to do the
suggest
right thing.
That
Right.
I want to do away with the safety laws and with the laws that pertain to clean water and clean air and so forth, as governor of California, I took charge of passing the strictest air pollution laws in the United States, the strictest air quality law that has ever been adopted in the United States, and we created an OSHA, an Occupational Safety and Health Agency for the protection of employees, before the federal government had one in place, and to this day, not one of its decisions or rulings
but
has
that's
ever
not
been
free
challenged.
enterprise, though. That's the government
So,
still.
I think some of those charges are missing the point. I am suggesting that there are literally thousands of unnecessary regulations that invade every facet of business and indeed very much of our personal lives, that are unnecessary, that government can do without, that have added $130 billion to the cost of production in this country, and that are contributing their part to inflation. And I would like to see us a little more free.
This is why I blame Reagan for a lot of
President
shit, dude.
Carter, another
He
crack
really
at
is
that?
the, like,
Sure.
at least
fact,
talking point wise,
The air pollution
is such a
standards
neoliberal.
laws
Like,
that
it's
were passed
just
in California were passed over
it's so
the
frustrating to hear this.
objections of Governor Reagan. And this is a very well-known fact.
He isn't hiding it.
Also, recently, when someone suggested that the Occupational Safety and Health Act should be abolished, Governor Reagan responded, "Amen." The offshore drilling rights.
Hell yeah, brother.
Is a question that Governor Reagan raises often. As a matter of fact, in the proposal for the Alaska lands legislation, 100% of all the offshore lands would be open for exploration, and 95% of all the Alaska lands where it is suspected or believed that minerals might exist. We have, with our 5-year plan for the leasing of offshore lands, proposed more land to be drilled than has been opened up for drilling since this program first started in 1954. So we're not putting restraints on American exploration. We're encouraging it in every way we can.
Governor Reagan, you have the last word on this question.
Yes, if it is a well-known fact that I opposed air pollution laws in California, the only thing I can possibly think of is that the president must be suggesting the law that the federal government tried to impose on the state of California, not a law, regulations, that would have made it impossible to drive an automobile within the city limits of any California city, or have a place to put it if you did drive it against their regulations. It would have destroyed the economy of California. And I must say, we had the support of Congress when we
Reagan's
pointed
a big
out
one.
how ridiculous this attempt was by the Environmental Protection Agency. We still have the strictest air control or air pollution laws in the country. As for offshore oiling, only 2% now is so leased and is producing oil. The rest, as to whether the lands are going to be opened in the next 5 years or so, we're already 5 years behind in what we should be doing. There is more oil now in the wells that have been drilled than has been taken out in the 121 years that they've been drilled.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Mr. President. The next question goes to Governor Reagan from William Hilliard.
Governor Reagan, wage earners in this country, especially the young, are supporting a Social Security system that continues to affect their income drastically. The system is fostering a struggle between the young and the old and is drifting the country toward a polarization of these two groups. How much longer?
And how many of the people who are mad about it are getting it now? How many people are getting it now and aren't saying a word?
Can the young wage earner expect to bear the ever-increasing burden of the Social Security system?
I say Carter is more progressive than Biden. I'm not even joking. At least in the first debate. Now that he has the 4 years under his belt, I don't think Carter did a great job of delivering on the things he wanted to, or at least said he wanted to. But Carter's been at least, I don't know, he was talking a lot about taxing the rich more, back to what it was before the last two administrations that we're in. I don't think that actually happened. And obviously once Reagan got in power, the tax rate for the 1% and for corporations went down significantly. But I do believe that Carter is actually more progressive than Biden is, in the sense, at least on economics. For his time, I think Carter was actually pretty progressive, at least verbally.
The Social Security system was based on a false premise with regard to how fast the number of workers would increase and how fast the number of retirees would increase. It is actuarially out of balance. And this first became evident about 16 years ago, and some of us were voicing warnings then. Now it is trillions of dollars out of balance.
Trillions and trillions.
And the only answer that has come so far is the biggest single tax increase in our nation's history, the payroll tax increase for Social Security, which will only put a Band-Aid on this and postpone the day of reckoning by a few years at most.
Day of reckoning.
What is needed is a study that I have proposed by a task force to look.
He always has a
experts
task
to
force.
look into this entire problem as to how it can be reformed and made actuarially sound, but with the premise that no one presently dependent on Social Security is going to have the rug pulled out from under them and not get their check.
Which is also funny that Republicans now, some of them wanted to just get rid of Social Security altogether or significantly cut it.
We cannot frighten, as we have with the threats and the campaign rhetoric that has gone on in this campaign, our senior citizens. Leave them thinking that in some way they're endangered and they would have no place to turn. They must continue to get those checks, and I believe that the system can be put on a sound actuarial basis. But it's going to take some study and some work, and not just passing a tax increase to let the load or the roof fall in on the next administration.
Would you repeat that question for President Carter?
Yes, President Carter, wage earners in this country, especially the young, are supporting a Social Security system that continues to affect their income drastically. The system is fostering a struggle between young and old and is drifting the country toward a polarization of these two groups. How much longer can the young wage earner expect to bear the ever-increasing burden of the Social Security system?
As long as there's a Democratic president in the White House, we will have a strong and viable Social Security system free of the threat of bankruptcy. Although Governor Reagan has changed his position lately, on 4 different occasions he has advocated making Social Security a voluntary system, which would in effect very quickly bankrupt it. I noticed also in the Wall Street Journal earlier this week that a preliminary report of his task force advocates making Social Security more sound by reducing the adjustments in Social Security for the retired people to compensate for the impact of inflation. These kinds of approaches are very dangerous to the security and the well-being and the peace of mind of the retired people of this country and those approaching retirement age. But no matter what it takes in the future to keep Social Security sound, it must be kept that way. And although there was a serious threat to the Social Security system and its integrity during the 1976 campaign and when I became president, the action of the Democratic Congress working with me has been to put Social Security back on a sound financial basis. That's the way it will stay.
Hit like in chat. Hit like in chat if you think you're going to get Social Security when you retire.
It is, I said, delayed the actuarial imbalance falling on us for just a few years with that increase in taxes, and I don't believe we can go on increasing the tax because the problem for the young people today is that they're paying in far more than they can ever expect to get out. Now, again, this statement that somehow I wanted to destroy it and I just changed my tune.
I should have took a screenshot of that at the beginning there, the pixelated Carter face.
Mr.
That could have been a good
President,
email.
The voluntary thing that I suggested many years ago was that a young man,
Carter 2024,
and raised by an aunt who
he
died,
can do a second term.
His aunt was ineligible for Social Security insurance because she was not his mother. And I suggested that if this is an insurance program, certainly the person who's paying in should be able to name his own beneficiaries. And that's the closest I've ever come to anything voluntary with Social Security. I, too, am pledged to a Social Security program that will reassure these senior citizens of ours they're going to continue to get their money. There are some changes I'd like to make. I would like to make a change that discriminates in the regulations against a wife who works and finds that she then is faced with a choice between her father or her husband's benefits if he dies
I'm telling you, Carter 2024.
or what she has paid in, but it does not recognize that she has also been paying in herself and she is entitled to more than she presently can get. I'd like to change that.
President Carter's rebuttal now.
Right. These constant suggestions that the basic Social Security system should be changed does cause concern and consternation among the aged of our country. It's obvious that we should have a commitment to them, that Social Security benefits should not be taxed, and that there would be no peremptory change in the standards by which Social Security payments are made to the retired people. We also need to continue to index the Social Security payments so that if inflation rises, the Social Security payments would rise a commensurate degree, to let the buying power of the Social Security check continue intact. In the past, the relationship between Social Security and Medicare has been very important to provide some modicum of aid for senior citizens in the retention of health benefits. Governor Reagan, as a matter of fact, began his political career campaigning around this nation against Medicare. Now we have an opportunity to move toward national health insurance with an emphasis on the prevention of disease, an emphasis on outpatient care, not inpatient care, an emphasis on hospital cost containment to hold down the cost of hospital care for those who are ill, an emphasis on catastrophic health insurance, so that if a family is threatened with being wiped out economically because of a very high medical bill, then the insurance would help pay for it. These are the kind of elements of a national health insurance important to the American people. Governor Reagan, again, typically is against such a proposal.
Governor?
There you go again. When I opposed Medicare,
oh my God,
there was another piece of legislation meeting the same problem before the Congress. I happened to favor the other piece of legislation and thought that it would be better for the senior citizens and provide better care than the one that was finally passed. I was not opposing the principle of providing care for them. I was opposing one piece of legislation as versus another. There is something else about Social Security, of course, that doesn't come out of the payroll tax. It comes out of the general fund that something should be done about. I think it's disgraceful that the disability insurance fund in Social Security finds checks going every month to tens of thousands of people who are locked up in our institutions for crime or for mental illness, and they are receiving disability checks from Social Security every month while a state institution provides for all of their needs and their care.
President Carter, you have the last word on this question.
I think this debate on Social Security, Medicare,
prisoners
national
aren't
health
human.
insurance typifies as vividly as any other subject tonight the basic historical differences between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. The allusions to basic changes in the minimum wage is another, and the deleterious comments that Governor Reagan has made about unemployment compensation. These commitments that the Democratic Party has historically made to the working families of this nation have been extremely important to the growth in their stature and in a better quality of life for them. I noticed recently that Governor Reagan frequently quotes Democratic presidents in his acceptance address and otherwise. I have never heard a candidate for president who is a Republican quote a Republican president. But when they get in office, they try to govern like Republicans. So it's good for the American people to remember there is a sharp, basic, historical difference between Governor Reagan and me on these crucial issues, also between the two parties that we represent.
Thank you, Mr. President. Governor Reagan, we now go to another question. A question to President Carter by Barbara Walters.
Thank you.
Barbara.
You have addressed some of the major issues tonight, but the biggest issue in the minds of American voters is yourselves, your ability to lead this country. When many voters go into that booth just a week from today, they will be voting their gut instinct about you men. You've already given us your reasons why people should vote for you. Now, would you please tell us, for this, your final question, why they should not vote for your opponent, why his presidency could be harmful to the nation, and having examined both your opponent's record and the man himself, tell us his greatest weakness.
Robert, reluctant as I am to say anything critical about Governor Reagan, I'll try to answer your question.
Okay.
First of all is the historical perspective that I just described.
Carter finally got a joke in.
This is a contest between a Democrat and a mainstream of my party, as exemplified by the actions that I've taken in the Oval Office the last 4 years, as contrasted with Governor Reagan, who in most cases does typify his party, but in some cases there is a radical departure by him from the heritage of Eisenhower and others. The most important crucial difference in this election campaign, in my judgment, is the approach to the control of nuclear weaponry and the inclination to control or not to control the spread of atomic weapons to other nations that don't presently have it, particularly the terrorist nations. The inclination that Governor Reagan has exemplified in many troubled times since he's been running for president, I think since 1968, to inject American military forces in places like North Korea, to put a blockade around Cuba this year.
It's pretty crazy that Reagan ran that many times.
To project American forces
since 1968
into a fishing dispute against the small nation of Ecuador on the west coast of South America. This is typical of his long-standing inclination on the use of American power, not to resolve disputes diplomatically and peacefully, but to show that the exercise of military power is best proven by the actual use of it. Obviously, no president wants war, and I certainly do not believe that Governor Reagan, if he were president, would want war. But a president in the Oval Office has to make a judgment on almost a daily basis about how to exercise the enormous power of our country for peace through diplomacy, or in a careless way, in a belligerent attitude, which has exemplified his attitudes in the past.
Barbara, would you repeat the question for Governor Reagan?
Yes, thank you. Realizing that you may be equally reluctant to speak ill of your opponent, may I ask why people should not vote for your opponent, why his presidency could be harmful to the nation, and having examined both your opponent's record and the man himself, could you tell us his greatest weakness?
Well, Barbara, I believe that there is a fundamental difference, and I think it has been evident in most of the answers that Mr. Carter has given tonight, that he seeks the solution to anything as another opportunity for a federal government program. I happen to believe that the federal government has usurped powers and autonomy and authority that belongs back at the state and local level. It has imposed on the individual freedoms of the people, and that there are more of these things that could be solved by the people themselves if they were given a chance, or by the levels of government that were closer to
Reagan,
them.
have you heard of
Now, as to why
communism?
I should be and he shouldn't be, when he was a candidate
you know,
in
the idea that maybe people
Carter
know what's best?
invented
Have you heard of that?
a thing he called the misery index. He added the rate of unemployment and the rate of inflation, and it came at that time to 12.5 under President Ford. And he said that no man with that size misery index had a right to seek re-election to the presidency. Today, by his own decision, the misery index is in excess of 20%. And I think this must suggest something. But
Damn, using his own words against him.
when I have quoted a Democrat president, as the president says, I was a Democrat. I said many foolish things back in those days. But the president that I quoted had made a promise, a Democrat promise. And I quoted him because it was never kept. And today you would find that that promise is at the very heart of what republicanism represents in this country today. And that's why I believe there are going to be millions of Democrats that are going to vote with us this time around, because they too want that promise kept. It was a promise for less government and less taxes and more freedom for the people.
President Carter.
Yes.
Much better answer again.
I mentioned
Reagan's
the
is too good,
radical
dude.
departure of Governor Reagan from
You know, all
the
the things
principles
he's
or
saying is
ideals
bullshit,
or
but
historical perspective
the way
of
he's
his own
saying
party.
it, you know?
I don't think this can be better illustrated than in the case with guaranteeing women equal rights under the Constitution of our nation. For 40 years, the Republican Party platforms called for guaranteeing women equal rights with a constitutional amendment. 6 predecessors of mine who served in the Oval Office called for this guarantee of women's rights. Governor Reagan and the new Republican
There was a
Party
fly.
has departed
See,
from this commitment.
remember when everyone made fun
A
of
very
the
severe
fly
blow to
going
the
on Mike
opportunity
Pence?
for women finally to correct
Flew on Carter. Didn't it fly on Hillary
discrimination
too?
under which they have suffered.
Has the fly
When a
only
man and a
attacked
woman do
people
the
who
same
have
amount
lost?
of work?
Is that a
man
sign?
gets paid $1, a woman only gets paid 59 cents. And the Equal Rights Amendment only says that equality of rights shall not be abridged for women by the federal government or by the state governments. That's all it says. A simple guarantee of equality of opportunity, which typifies the Democratic Party and which is a very important commitment of mine, as contrasted with Governor Reagan's radical departure from the long-standing policies of his own party.
Governor Reagan.
Yes. Mr. President, once again,
Reagan likes to start
I
with
happen
yes.
to be against the amendment because I think the amendment will take this problem out of the hands of elected legislators and put it in the hands of unelected judges. I am for equal rights, and while you have been in office for 4 years and not one single state, and most of them have a majority of Democratic legislators, has added to the ratification or voted to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, while I was governor more than 8 years ago, I found
And when the Democrats during Obama had a supermajority at one point, and they didn't ratify Roe v. Wade when they could have.
14 separate instances where women were discriminated against in the body of California law, and I had passed and signed into law 14 statutes that eliminated those discriminations, including the economic ones that you have just mentioned, equal pay and so forth. I believe that if in all these years that we've spent trying to get the amendment, that we'd spent as much time correcting these laws as we did in California, and we were the first to do it. If I were president, I would also now take a look at the hundreds of federal regulations which discriminate against women and which go right on while everyone is looking for an amendment. I would have someone ride herd in those regulations, and we'd start eliminating those discriminations in the federal government against women.
President Carter.
Yes. Howard, I'm a Southerner, and I share the basic beliefs of my region about an excessive government intrusion into the private affairs of American citizens and also into the private affairs of the free enterprise system. One of the commitments that I made was to deregulate the major industries of this country. We've been remarkably successful with the help of the Democratic Congress. We've deregulated the air industry, the rail industry, the trucking industry, financial institutions, now working on the communications industry. In addition to that, I believe this element of discrimination is something that the South has seen so vividly as a blight on our region of the country, which has now been corrected. Not only racial discrimination, but discrimination against people that have to work for a living. Because we have been trying to pick ourselves up by our bootstraps since the long Depression years and lead a full and useful life in the affairs of this country. We've made remarkable success. It's part of my consciousness and my commitment to continue this progress. So my heritage as a Southerner, my
I always think of that
Oval
character
Office
from Pirates of the
convinces
Caribbean. Every
me
time I
that
hear
what I've just
Bootstrap.
described is a proper course for the future.
Governor Reagan, yours is the last word.
Well, my last word is again to say that we were talking about this very simple amendment in women's rights. And I make it plain again, I am for women's rights. But I would like to call the attention of the people to the fact that
I am for women's rights, but
could be used by mischievous men to destroy discriminations that properly belong by law
There's
to
always
women,
a but.
respecting the physical differences between the two sexes, labor laws that protect them against doing things that would be physically harmful to them. Those could all be challenged by men. And the same would be true with regard to combat service in the military and so forth. I thought that was the subject we were supposed to be on, but if we're talking about how much we think about the working people and so forth, I'm the only fellow that ever ran for this job who was 6 times president of his own union and still has a lifetime membership in that union.
Gentlemen, each of you now have 3 minutes.
Yeah, he was part of the. I saw it earlier. It was like the.
First of all, I'd like to thank
what union was it? It was one of
for making this debate possible.
unions in Hollywood.
I think it's been a very constructive debate, and I hope it's helped to acquaint the American people with the sharp differences between myself and Governor Reagan. Also, I want to thank the people of Cleveland and
I think it was the Screen Actors Guild. Yeah.
During this last few hours in my life.
Yeah, Screen Actors Guild from 1947 to 1952, and then 1959 until 1960.
Almost 4 years. I've had to make thousands of decisions, and each one of those decisions has been a learning process. I've seen the strength of my nation, and I've seen the crises that it approached in a tentative way, and I've had to deal with those crises as best I could. As I've studied the record between myself and Governor Reagan. I've been impressed with the stark differences that exist between us. I think the results of this debate indicate that that fact is true. I consider myself in the mainstream of my party. I consider myself in the mainstream even of the bipartisan list of presidents who served before me. The United States must be a nation strong. The United States must be a nation secure. We must have a society that's just and fair. And we must extend the benefits of our own commitment to peace to create a peaceful world. I believe that since I've been in office, there have been 6 or 8 areas of combat evolved.
They're still doing the slow zoom in. They did that all the way back in.
I alone have had to determine the interest of
in the
my
1960
country
debates
and the degree of involvement of my country. I've done that with moderation, with care, with thoughtfulness, sometimes consulting experts, but I've learned in this last 3.5 years that when an issue is extremely difficult, when the call is very close, the chances are the experts will be divided almost 50-50. And the final judgment about the future of a nation, war, peace, involvement, reticence, thoughtfulness, care, consideration, concern, has to be made by the man in the Oval Office. It's a lonely job, but with the involvement of the American people in the process with an open government, the job is a very gratifying one. The American people now are facing, next Tuesday, a lonely decision. Those listening to my voice will have to make a judgment about the future of this country. And I think they ought to remember that one vote can make a lot of difference. If one vote per precinct had changed in 1960, John Kennedy would never have been president of this nation. And if a few more people had gone to the polls and voted in 1968, Hubert Humphrey would have been president. Richard Nixon would not. There is a partnership involved. And our nation to stay strong.
And if all those Bernie bros didn't,
to raise high the banner of human rights,
would have voted for
to set
Hillary.
an example for the rest of the world, to let our deep beliefs and commitments be felt by others in all the nations, is my plan for the future. I ask the American people to join me in this partnership.
Governor Reagan.
Pokemon go to the polls.
Yes, I would like to add my words of thanks to the ladies of the League of Women Voters for making these debates possible. I'm sorry that we couldn't persuade the bringing in of the third candidate so that he could have been seen also in these debates. But still, it's good that at least once all 3 of us were heard by the people of this country. Next Tuesday is Election Day. Next Tuesday, all of you will go to the polls.
Everyone's saying Tuesday.
You'll stand there in the polling
I thought that was
place
only a
and make
Maryland thing.
A decision. I think when you make that decision, it might be well if you would ask yourself, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Is it easier for you to go and buy things in the stores than it was 4 years ago? Is there more or less unemployment in the country than there was 4 years ago? Is America as respected throughout the world as it was? Do you feel that our security is as safe, that we're as strong as we were 4 years ago? And if you answer
to me,
all
it's
those
always
questions,
funny that
yes, why then I think your choice is very obvious as to who you'll vote for.
It's funny that
if you don't agree,
we always preach about going to the polls,
if
go to vote.
Think that this
but it's
course
super
that we've
hard
been on
to
for the last 4 years is
in
what
some
you
states,
would like to see us follow for the next 4.
Because Election Day is a national holiday, so people don't
Then
have off of work. It's
I
always
could
on a
suggest
Tuesday.
another choice that you have.
Some places the polls close at like 7.
This country doesn't have to be
and obviously there's
in the shape that it is in.
Disenfranchisement.
We do not
as well.
have to go on
obviously
sharing in scarcity with the country getting worse off, with unemployment growing. We talk about the unemployment lines. If all of the unemployed today were in a single line, allowing 2 feet for each one of them, that line would reach from New York City to Los Angeles, California. All of this can be cured, and all of it can be solved. I have not had the experience that the president has had in holding that office.
That's why.
But I think in being governor of California, the most populous state
Well, there's a
in
lot
the
of
Union,
reasons I think that the last
if it were a
election was
nation,
one of the
it would be the
biggest turnout.
seventh-ranking economic
One of those
power in
was
the
because
world.
the early voting.
I too had some lonely
under
moments
COVID
and decisions
the
to
mail-in
make.
ballots.
I know that the economic program that I have proposed for this nation in the next few years can resolve many of the problems that trouble us today. I know because we did it there. We cut the increased cost of government the increase in half over the 8 years. We returned $5.7 billion in tax rebates, credits, and cuts to our people. We, as I've said earlier, fell below the national average in inflation when we did that. And I know that we did give back authority and autonomy to the people. I would like to have a crusade today, and I would like to lead that crusade with your help. And it would be one to take government off the backs of the great people of this country and turn you loose again to do those things that I know you can do so well because you did them and made this country great.
Yeah, the word crusade is...
Thank you.
Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, for 60 years...
I'll say, like, there's a couple moments where, like, obviously Reagan's a much better, like, public speaker, I think, than anyone we've really seen so far. You know, he has the riz, he has the charisma. And I kind of, but like the way he says some things, I actually feel like Trump, I don't know if Trump pulled from him directly, you know what I mean? But I see a little bit of the Trump vibes a little bit. Just in a, you know, Reagan says it in a nicer way.
League of Women Voters has been committed to citizen education.
The way
and
Reagan
effective
describes his, like,
of Americans in governmental
his political
and political
career.
affairs. The most critical element of all in that process is an informed citizen who goes to
Like
the
a
polls
Reagan,
and who votes.
Like Reagan, you know, kept saying, like, you know, we were the first to do this. Like Trump says a lot of that kind of shit too, where like he was the first president to do this. I was the first president to do that. You know, no one's ever done it before. Like that kind of stuff. He doesn't do it all the time, but Reagan was doing a little bit of it. You know what I mean? And Trump does that a lot. In a lot of his like speeches and stuff. You know, it's that kind of like, you know, no one's ever been like he has. You know, he's the first to ever do this and that, you know, try to be like he's historical, he's extraordinary, you know what I mean? Like I remember Trump comparing himself to like he's as good as Lincoln, like he's the best president since Lincoln, you know what I mean? Like he's doing historical things.
On behalf of the League of Women Voters now, I would like to thank President Carter and Governor Reagan for being with us in Cleveland tonight. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you and good night.
Good night. All right, well, like I said, that was going to be one of our shorter chunks here because, like I said, there's only 2 debates. One of them was an hour, and then an hour and a half. There was supposed to be a third. That never happened. But so what happened? What happened in the election? Well, this happened. Just complete landslide. I don't think anyone's ever been this close. Yeah, right here. Reagan received the highest number of electoral votes ever won by a non-incumbent presidential candidate. And Republicans won control of the United States Senate for the first time since 1952. Due to the rise of conservatism following Reagan's victory, historians have considered the election to be a political realignment. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I feel like Carter sounds more progressive than like a lot of Democrats now. And it makes me think that like Reagan landsliding, not just this election, but the next one, that maybe like not maybe not a conscious thing, but well, maybe a conscious thing is that because I do think these the parties do look at voter turnout for certain things, and I think the Democrats maybe like that's why you had a Clinton. You know what I mean? And I think Obama might be more of a little bit of an outlier a little bit, but like, to be fair, Obama like did a lot. He wasn't as, you know, he said a lot of stuff, and I don't think he did as much as he said. I mean, besides like, I guess gay marriage and Obamacare, if you count that. But you know what I mean? Where I feel like the Democrats maybe went further back to the right to try to coax some of the, you know, people who maybe voted for Reagan, because I know that like there's some people who, you know, were around this time voting, that some people voted for Reagan and Obama. Like that to me just doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? But like I think Reagan had that charisma, and like people were just sick of, I think, of the, you know, the Democrats at this time. Kind of like what Reagan was saying in the debates. You know? But I also think Carter got, you know, the Iran hostage crisis, you know, the fact that you know, that like he didn't really get you know, the unemployment rate down significantly. Oh yeah, people just vote for who they like. Yeah. So if you can talk, you can win. Yeah. Yeah. You can say the craziest shit if you say it in a well way. You know what I mean? A well way, as I can't speak. I'm never running for president. And thank God, because they would just pull up Twitch clips, and my campaign would be over quick. I actually think, will there ever be a Twitch streamer who runs for president? Do you think like Ninja could move the needle? Or like Mr. Beast? You think he can move the needle? But interestingly enough, Anderson got almost 5.7 million votes. That's a decent amount, 6%. But even if, let's say, every person who voted for Anderson voted for Carter, still probably wouldn't have won. Probably. Yeah, Carter got Georgia, obviously. West Virginia. Did he get Maryland? He did get Maryland. And Minnesota. Minnesota's always been pretty left. I respect it. Hey, he got a Hawaii, too. But yeah, like, if you lose California and Florida, you're toast. And Ohio, you're toast. I think you're more likely to see politicians on Twitch than streamers in politics. That's true. That's true. I kind of agree with that. That's right. George H.W. Bush is Reagan's vice president. Dude, these people. Ugh. Also, what a boring... I don't like the spacing here. It's too big of a space. I don't like that. Okay, they still have the kind of similar one from last time. I like the green. I'm a big fan of green over blue. Ted Kennedy ran. Jerry Brown, Cliff Finch. But yeah, Reagan would win, landslide. And we'll get to it, but for some reason, the Democrats put Mondale as the next candidate when Reagan was up for re-election. For some reason, they're like, yes, let's get the guy from one of the least liked presidents who got destroyed in the Electoral College to go up again and challenge. I don't think that's smart. I do think one of the reasons like Biden did well against Trump too is because like he worked with Obama. I don't know anything about Mondale. I'm assuming he's not going to be exactly the same, but I just feel like just on surface level that just putting someone back up who was part of the team, the squad that got destroyed, I just don't think that's smart. You know what I mean? Like George H.W. Bush, I'm sure in his debates is going to talk about how he worked with Reagan because Reagan was super popular. It's probably one of the reasons he won. I blame Reagan for both Bushes. Pence and Trump are night and day, yeah. But I meant more of just Pence announced that he was running. Was it the other day? No way Pence is doing anything. Because he's part of a losing, to be fair, I think people didn't vote for Trump because of Pence. You know what I mean? What was I trying to say? I just think it's not smart to put a guy up who was part of the team that got landslided. You know what I mean? I don't know who else was running, so we'll have to look into that, see if maybe there was better options. We'll have to look how close the primaries were. But regardless, I think that was my favorite debate we've watched so far. Seeing Anderson was interesting. Oh, I wanted to look at Anderson. I wanted to see more about him real quick. Also served in the Army. Everyone served in the Army. He strongly criticized the Vietnam War, based. And the Watergate scandal, based. Oh, he wanted to cut Social Security, not based. Oh, he originally was part of the Republican race, but then he dropped out to pursue an independent campaign. This is what I wish Bernie did. But Bernie he does believe in coalitions, He won support among Democrats who were disillusioned with Carter, as well as Rockefeller Republicans. College students he did well with. He organized for electoral reforms such as instant runoff voting system. Interesting. He endorsed Ralph Nader in 2000. And he founded the Justice Party. Oh, really? Interesting. He died in 2017 in Arlington. Went to Harvard. Curious if he 2008 he endorsed Barack Obama. Yeah, he created the Justice Party, which has a couple of more progressive people in it, I know. Interesting. Well, regardless, I think this was the best debates, best chunk, our best year that we've watched yet. I think they're only gonna get better and better. The production value also helps to make it a little bit less dry. But yeah, there's a little bit more back and forth, a little bit more jabbing. So I'm curious to see if that continues to escalate. So yeah, next up we have Reagan versus Mondale, which I think there's 3 debates again, and I think that's gonna be another like longer thing. So this one, I think this is gonna be our shortest one of all the ones we've watched. And like I said, if I do any during the week, I might have to break them up. We'll see in the future. But regardless, we have, what is that, 9 down out of 35? We're cruising, I think. We're at a great start. But I know I'm going to get busy near the end of June, so I'm trying to build up that buffer now so we can hit our target of finishing these by the end of June. But, yeah, we'll see. I don't know when the next one will be. Probably not this week, but maybe this weekend. Maybe like Sunday. I'm trying to think. Yeah, maybe this weekend. I don't want to promise anything right now, but yeah, if you're following me, you'll get notifications when I go live. I also try to post in Discord sometimes, as much of an advance notice if I'm going live sometime soon. Also on Twitter, I try to do that as well. Just at CursonaFun on Twitter. Thanks, Nightbot, for supporting my shout out here. But yeah, I love doing these kind of things. I've wanted to always do more political stuff. I know I did the We Grow Together a little bit. I want to do another episode of that sometime soon. But yeah, so this is a cool, I feel like a random idea that came to my head, and I'm like, I wasn't sure how it would go, but I'm having a lot of fun doing them. Definitely interesting. Yeah, so I think we're going to keep it up for sure. But yeah, next one, hopefully sometime this weekend. Hopefully. All right, y'all. That is it for me. Like I said, next stream maybe this weekend. I got nothing else to say. I rambled too much at the end, so I'm going to shut up now. Carter, 2024, right? Who's with me? All right, y'all. Have a good evening, good night, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Appreciate it. Appreciate you watching, lurking, chatting, following, all that good stuff, and subscribing as well. There's some subscribers today as well, so appreciate it. But I will catch y'all later, okay? Have a good evening. See you later.